Vice President.
Senator Young.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. I don't intend to be much longer, in so much as many of the points have been exacerbated by a number of other speakers. But in presenting this, I want to give credence to the Honorable Attorney General for bringing what I consider to be a balanced bill. So while many may focus on the fact that we are decriminalizing marijuana and the use of marijuana, 30 grams, up to 30 grams, and we're looking at over 30 grams to 60 grams is only a fixed penalty notice. I also take note of the fact that coming out of the other place, some of the amendments made has made it clear that we are about making it safe for children. We are about setting some sort of boundaries for the users, inclusive of the fact that Section 5, subsection 8, Clause 5, subsection 8, sorry, that speaks about the use of marijuana in the premises of nurseries and kindergartens and early childhood care centers. This, along with the fact that a number of the fines and penalties and jail times have been increased exponentially, sends a strong signal that while we understand the recreation of marijuana, while we understand the medicinal purposes, while we understand the benefits to the many communities, the government and the AG is still responsible enough to take into cognizance that there are a number of violations that take place even now, because as it is unregulated, usually you can, where I am from, you can meet the fellas on the block that's smoking right outside the school, opposite the school. And that in itself is not a charge by itself. But this law brings that into being a charge by itself, notwithstanding having marijuana. So I wanted to point out the fact that many speakers have indicated and pointed out the fact that balance is necessary. But I think even in bringing this legislation to be passed and sending the other legislation to the Joint Select Committee, it shows a balance of what is necessary to be done and what can wait. Because I think, above everything else, nobody can argue with the fact that the judiciary, the legal system, the pressure that it puts on individuals, the fact that our system is unforgiving in its natural state. Even natural justice in Trinidad and Tobago is usually unforgiving. I was a board member of Vision and Mission. And I remember quite clearly some people, when we go to them to ask them to have people to come to work, they didn't care what you were convicted of, but he's a criminal. No, well, he only got, you know, just some possession and he had a wrapper, but he went to jail, but he's a criminal. I've seen people sit down and look at the news, and when they see somebody, you know, somebody got locked up, people make all type of statements that you should get rid of all of them, lock up all of them. But the fact remains, until it becomes your son or your daughter, then, well, the police wicked. Or then justice is, you know, you're innocent until proven guilty. So I say all that to say that I am grateful to be part of this august place that will pass such a bill, that I can tell my children and grandchildren, once upon a time, we lived in a place that was kind of unfair to you, but because of what was done here today, things will be a little bit better. So, Vice President, I thank you for the opportunity to contribute.
Senator Dylan Remy.
Mr. Vice President, I thank you for the opportunity to make a very short contribution to this bill entitled the Act to Amend the Dangerous Drugs Act, Chapter 11, 25. I have really enjoyed the presentations made so far in the House today. And in spite of the fact that, a lot of people have there have been some things that have been repetitive, I think people have done it in their own way. And it shows me that at the level of the Senate, people are interested in our nation's development, particularly your youth. And we are not just, in other words, this is not just another thing for us. It is important. It's so important to people that they are making excellent contributions. So I just congratulate my colleagues who would have gone before. Mr. Vice President, because I'm this late in, lots of things that I would have liked to say have already been said. However, I want to thank the Attorney General that the bill that is being brought today is not a bill to wholly legalize cannabis use in Trinidad and Tobago, because I would not have been happy with that. I fully understand the delicate balancing that had to be done to come up with the bill that is before us today. And Mr. Vice President, while I do appreciate what is being attempted in the bill, for instance, Clause 4, where the attempt is being made to remove from the prison population the thousands of small men who are in remand for possession of less than 30 grams of cannabis or 100 grams, depending on what they've been there for, as mentioned by the Attorney General when he gave the statistics. I understand that it is more than just looking at the criminal justice system. Like Senator Mark said about the medicinal use of cannabis, I would have preferred to see the regulations, as the Honorable Minister said, that are in draft now, because for me, the big thing about cannabis use at this point in time is its use for medicinal purposes, legalizing that for medicinal purposes in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm looking forward to see the regulations, Mr. Minister, Honorable Minister. I would like to focus my attention, Mr. Vice President, on the use of children, on the effects of cannabis use in children. In utero, we have issues with the use of cannabis by pregnant women. And some of the presenters have also spoken about the youth, especially in teenagers. Because while we try to balance this matter about decriminalization, we must consider the effect on children. Senator Richards and Senator Tripathi and Senator Timal did go into about this matter in terms of the young people, but I would just like to put another few points on the table. Trinidad and Tobago, the Global School Health Survey of 2011, the ages of the students surveyed were between ages 13 to 15 years. That survey showed that 7.4% of girls and 11% of boys had used marijuana one or more times in their lives. 13 to 15-year-olds. The question is, would this bill cause these numbers to go up? It has already been mentioned that probably some of our youth may feel that decriminalization makes it safe to use it now. Would this number go up? Mr. Vice President, I'm concerned about the children in the homes where the 4 cannabis plants are growing. We have many homes where the children, well, there are many homes in a yard. So you could have, let's say, 4 or 5 homes in that area. And suppose you have 4 plants, each house legally holding 4 plants in it. The children in that yard would be exposed to, I would say, almost a plantation. I mean, it may sound ridiculous, but the truth is that that is what the law says. It is legal to have 4 plants in a home. And we know that we do have lots of places where there are many homes in a yard, and many children in that area. Mr. Vice President, permit me to quote from a World Health Report 2016 on the health and social effects of non-medical cannabis use. I will just point out a few areas. The neurobiology of long-term cannabis use. Page 15 of the report said, the daily use of cannabis over years and decades appears to produce persistent impairments in memory and cognition, especially when the cannabis use begins in adolescence. Continuing to quote, brain imaging studies comparing school students who are regular long-term cannabis users and non-using students typically find poorer cognitive performance and large decreases in perfusion in the former, that's the ones who are regular using SPECT scans. And these changes could partially explain the lower educational attainment and lower grades among chronic cannabis users. Page 17 of the report continues. The adolescent brain seems to be more vulnerable to cannabis than the adult brain, and early initiation of heavy use appears to disrupt the trajectory of normal brain development. Heavy or regular adolescent cannabis users manifest a range of cognitive deficits, including impairments in attention, learning and memory, and an inability to switch ideas or responses. These deficits are similar in adults, but in adolescence, they are more likely to persist and may recover only after long periods of abstinence from the drug. The report also talks about prenatal cannabis exposure. Quoting, nevertheless, accumulating evidence suggests that prenatal cannabis exposure may interfere with normal development and maturation of the brain. Children exposed to cannabis in utero demonstrate impaired attention, learning and memory, impulsivity and behavioral problems, and a higher likelihood of using cannabis when they mature. In other words, the vulnerable, here we are talking about children in utero, and the young children and the adolescents are specifically at risk for long-term effects of cannabis use. Cannabis is also responsible for non-communicable diseases. There may be associated increased risk of strokes, particularly in younger adults, and testicular and prostate cancer, cervical cancer, heart attacks, etc. The article did say, though, that this area may need further research. I agree with the Honorable Attorney General's statement about the significant effort to prevent initiation of use in cannabis in youth. The Honorable Minister spoke about education. Education. My concern is that if we make this decriminalization something that is sexy, or youth may feel that they have a license to use, and so increase what, as one of the other presenters said, making it, in other words, them thinking that is something that is sexy to do, and therefore we could do it more than we were doing it before. In other words, moving from 7% and 11% to more than that. Senator Richards spoke about the use of the issue about impact, the issue of the impact of reintegration of persons who are now incarcerated. Again, a very, getting people out of prison is excellent, but what happens when they come out? Yes, their records are going to be expunged, but we also have to look at things that will have to be done to make sure that they don't just come out of prison, but they don't go back into prison, because they would have had the systems put into place to make sure that not just there's no criminal record on their they don't have a criminal record, but that efforts are made to make sure that what is done with them outside, make sure that they don't go back in. Efforts are made to do that. while we are talking about education in terms of prevention, we also have to make sure that the education also goes in terms of the parents. The children do what they see the parents doing. People do what people see. And therefore, the children who are growing up, particularly in schools, adolescents, are using drugs because most likely they would have had the experience at home. So as we're talking about prevention of education in terms of preventing children, we also have to make sure that we get the parents' involvement. And I like Senator Young's statement about community involvement, not just in terms of what happens in terms of reintegration, but community involvement in terms of making sure that people understand that this is not something that is, it's not something that's good for you, you know? But we have to make sure that it is, efforts are being made, not just to speak it, but to walk them through the issues. And it has to be community-based. I'm agreeing with you, sir. Mr. Vice President, this decriminalization matter brings several changes in its impact. And the processes that need to be explored holistically, not just from a criminal justice system. There are several systems that need to be put in place. For example, Clause 7, the new Clause 5C on page 15 that talks about that talks about police. The Clause 5C talks about a person who, under the influence of cannabis, does anything which constitutes negligence, etc. Part B has it in possession on a school bus, etc. And then Part C operates, navigates, or is in actual physical control of a motor vehicle, etc. How does the police officer know that that person is under the influence of cannabis? Currently, the police could use a breathalyzer for testing for alcohol, but testing for cannabis currently involves a urine test. Who and when would that test be done? We would have to make sure that the systems are put in place. Mr. Vice President, in summary, while I understand what is being attempted by the bill, I strongly recommend that as a Senate, as a Parliament, we make it very clear that as a nation, drug use is undesirable. It is not good for us, especially our youth, and we must ensure that if this bill is passed, every measure should be put into place to make sure that we make every effort to prevent drug use. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for allowing me to partake in this bill. And I must say up front, every fabric of my being sometimes would kind of hesitate in supporting this bill, because I have been trained about the evils of drugs, the evils of marijuana, the evils of cocaine, and somehow with that training and what I've seen and horror stories that I've had, it has me going through a certain level of disquiet, which I started about a few years ago when the discussions on the world scene, it left that that different countries was supporting the need to decriminalize or even to legalize marijuana. So as I open, I must say I may have that bias from before, but as I say, I was open to look at the literature, look at changes, look at what happened in other countries, and see that if we are going that way, because I understand both the opposition and the government wants it to go that way, maybe we have to see if any sort of recommendations could be made. And other senators did bring up certain issues like the effects on children, what could we do to prevent that, the social effects that may fall out that may come. So, Mr. Vice President, I heard Shakil's case where Senator Young mentioned that area. And my clinic in Barataria, the mental health and wellness clinics, we actually cater for patients around that area. Coming from we look at patients from Beta, Mova, we look at Barataria, El Dorado, El Socorro, St. Joseph. So it's a wide spectrum of persons we see. And yes, I understand the plight of Shakil, and I understood, what do we do with young men like that? And part of the solution Senator, I remember when we had young persons like that, part of the recommendations is we have to get a mentorship program for him. Because remember, this guy never even saw Grand Bazaar. And he lives there. So mentorship programs mean persons come in, we identify their levels of, they may be exposed to the gang in the area, that area. We have a duty to latch that guy onto other families to say, listen, this is another way of life. And this, I think, is something that we may have to go forward if we want to save our youth. But as we look at Shakil, I want to now go on the other side. I want to mention the plight of Ernestine. Ernestine is a mother from Never Dirty Him Over. She has a 27-year-old son. And when she came to me, her son was actually stripping, walking down the streets, picking up stones, pelting people, causing what we call social distress. And certain communities would never like persons and individuals like that around them, because it really causes some social distress to the neighbors, to the mother, the embarrassment, and always being called out. Police have been called. So people are totally fed up with her son. But poor Ernestine, she comes to us from clinic time to time. And you see, if I support this piece of legislation, she would come to clinic on next Tuesday, and she would really abuse me. Yeah, and I could understand verbal abuse. She'll say, why I did that? Because since her son was 15 years and first started marijuana, she came seeking help. We couldn't help him because he was a minor, so he had to go to the child guidance clinic. And it took about 2 years before he can get an appointment in the child guidance clinic. So he was left there. He was left to just continue using the drugs, and he tripped. And this was a guy who had great potential, attending a high school. Mother would supply books, was proud of him, and suddenly came for help. We were not able to help him. Child guidance took too long. So we failed this guy. And this is where I'm looking at. We have failed certain young persons, and we will continue failing them unless we put things in place. Because if we are going to open up the scenario, as Senator Remy mentioned, we have to put things in place to catch these individuals and somehow bring them in to help them. So this 15-year-old guy, now 27-year-old, still causes a problem. What is the stress she has? She has stress, one, when he starts to walk down the place, they call her from her workplace. The neighbors call her. Recently, he moved into a church and slept naked in the church. And the community there wrote a letter to us in clinic. How could we help this situation? So what I'm saying, the difficulty she has also is when she calls for an ambulance, she doesn't get the help, the support service to say that my son is tripping. And this is something, Mr. Vice President, I wanted to mention. Netherlands and Holland and all these places, they can have beautiful pieces of legislation to legalize, decriminalize. But if somebody starts to walk down in their streets, their main roads, naked, be assured an ambulance will come and pick up that person and get them into a place like a hospital. They have the backup service. And this is what I'm saying. If you're going to support this, we need backup service. We need an ambulance service that can come on board. We need mental health officers round the clock, 24 hours, that the police can call and say, listen, we need help to apprehend somebody moving there. An ambulance they can still hook onto the global ambulance service, but at least, that person is taken away into St. Anne's Hospital. So 2 problems there. We need to have mental health officers around the clock. Number 2, we need St. Anne's Hospital. I mentioned some time ago that previous administrations and this administration said they want to close down St. Anne's Hospital because of, the cost factor, and it costs a lot to keep people in St. Anne's Hospital. But if you don't have places to put these individuals, they are going to create a social distress. If more persons are going to trip and more persons are going to have psychotic breaks, and we don't have places to put them, we're going to leave them in society, and you find out the persons out there who are already stressed out with bandits and traffic and other unemployment, you're going to put that added burden of stress. So the government may have to look at somehow revisiting the closure of St. Anne's Hospital, because you need places to house persons who maybe fall out from this situation. So as I go on, Mr. Vice President, I have another patient, a teenager. His parents are 2 attorneys, and they came to me and said, look, this 16-year-old boy doesn't want to go to school. He's buying the weed, and he's smoking the weed, and he's only playing video games whole day. So this is his life. No motivation. They will cry, they will plead, they will try to stop him, and he threatens them. He almost, as I almost hit his father down recently, and he will go out, and he will get his weed, and he will come back. Now, what options do they have there? Parent there, there's no place of a clean, safe place that if my son trips tomorrow I can want to call a social work department and say, carry my son there. I can't cope with him. Long ago, we could have carried them to certain homes like St. Jude's home. You have to go to the magistrate courts. Now, St. Anne's Hospital has a ward where it has 6 children. If the court determines that those kids need to be placed there, they will place them there. So we have to create spaces for the young population who may be tripping, who parents cannot do anything. What choice you have? You could call the police, you can call the social worker, but the fact is you're faced with a child there. And you understand you're caught between a rock and a hard place. If that child is there, is St. Anne's Hospital the correct place? But parents cannot cope. It's a helpless situation. So we have to create situations like that to know what we are going to, where we are going to put them. Safe places where we can keep those children, where we could guide them, teach them stress management, help them with any sort of video addiction they may have or game addiction and other, give them techniques how to help their life skills. So all these are challenges that this bill will have to push out there that we as in the legislature may have to look to see how we are going to manage that. Because then we'll be doing a disservice to people by having legislation and giving a greater degree of social distress. So I have seen the cries of parents, the frustration of mental health workers in St. Anne's who say, well, doc, this patient was there last week. He came in with drugs and psychotic and we treated him. He doesn't want to go CORA because CORA is a voluntary program. We have the Substance Abuse Prevention Treatment Center. He doesn't want to even be, if his parents are willing to pay for him to go to the other institutions, like, they have the institution where other institutions you could be paid and stay in those institutions, and he doesn't want to go. That individual is let back out because we don't have space in St. Anne's, and back in society, back on drugs, and it comes back. It's a revolving door syndrome. And quite honestly, we have to somehow we have to put legislation in place where we could get those individuals and probably have mandatory rehabilitation for such individuals, because we are going to be spinning top and mud with this coming back and forth. So, Mr. Vice President, I know the ill effects of marijuana, and I just want to mention that, while I was pleased that Senator Richards went on to some of the effects that they are seeing, the fallout that they are having in the other countries which legislated, for the use of marijuana. And he mentioned the drive-in, he mentioned the fact that emergency departments are being filled. And those are things that alarmed us, because we were looking to see what sort of fallout we would have. But I must say, marijuana by itself, I must say, is a safer drug than alcohol. It doesn't really cause deaths. It doesn't cause coma. So if you have to compare alcohol and marijuana, marijuana is what I would support. And yeah, so I must say that. Less, you don't really get addicted to such, so it's a drug then. If I had a choice, I would say marijuana, but put some more levels some levels of control over the alcohol. Remember abroad in America, 21 years and over before you could use alcohol. So those are things we have to say, if we are going to lose marijuana, why we don't put a little restrictions on the alcohol? And this is what we may have to look at. Because what I'm saying, both of them out there may cause an additive, cumulative effect. And we see right now we can't deal with what we have available. So this is my fear, is that we may be opening up a Pandora's box where more persons may go on the marijuana, may go on the alcohol, and cause a great social distress. Senator Remy mentioned the fact that there's a study that was done by and looked at the use in schools. And this study, Mr. Vice President, I too looked at the youth. And I'm thinking, how could we get these youth? How could we get those individuals to move out from the block, to get into a program? Government has billion programs, the MILAT, they have CPEP, they have things that we ask our social workers, get those guys involved. They don't want to go. They are getting a stipend, and sometimes they go there and they don't want to go in those programs. So I'm thinking, you have the youths there, they are idle youths, and I'm saying we may have to criminalize against idle youths. How are we going to do that? If you are less than 18, and you're not in school or a training program, or in your father's business, if it's farming, then you have to be in a place. And I don't want to call it boot camp. You put them in some kind of camp, call it youth camp, but let them be involved there, rather than sit on the block idle. So we may have to look at those measures to get the youths that, a service. National service. service, yeah. So we have to look at that service for those youths because I think they will be caught under this. So, yeah, the unmotivated youth, they already have a challenge. And you see, marijuana by itself causes a motivational syndrome, I think was mentioned by Senator Timur. So they may smoke and all they want to do is sit down whole day, they laugh, they giggle, and they don't have the drive. We already have a challenge with our young males in the educational system. You look at all the admissions in the university and the young males are falling back. And this is what I'm frightened for, that this may now be an additive effect on that. Because we are challenged to know how to get that young male to study. I have 3 boys, so I'm scared. So, you know, I have no daughters. If I had a daughter, I say, well, probably she will be a professional. But with 3 boys, I say, oh, I hope they don't have that level of, you know, those guys don't want to study. You know, the guys out there now, we have to motivate guys. We have to get them out. And this is a challenge we have in the educational system. We don't want to create a nation of young, happy zombies. They're happy. They laugh and they're happy all the time. And there was an accident I saw once where some guys in a car actually struck somebody, and the lady came out and she was bleeding. And they were giggling. So they could not even appreciate the damage you had done to this 62-year-old lady who was bleeding, and they were giggling about it. Oh, why we didn't take a turn? So the level of the drugs could cause problem. You see, marijuana could reduce ability to think, focus, concentrate. It causes academic performance will fail.
So a matter of caution. So a lot of what have been said before is along those lines. What you've said prior brought a new dimension to the argument, even though some of the points were made before. But if you're going into the benefits and the negatives and the positives, that part of it has been said ad nauseum by almost every single senator that has spoken thus far. So you're running into a realm of tedious repetition if you're going down that road. I just caution you, because if you have anything new or a different dimension going forward, then I invite you now to bring that forward, and there's no need to go back down over the negatives and the positives of marijuana use.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. So guided. But I just want to mention the fact that we have to get at the youths. We have to get at the youths, and recently, I just want to quote a newspaper, Diego Martin North Secondary School, Loop News. There was a Trinidad 6 schoolgirls suspended after marijuana video goes viral. This was on the 31st of January, 2019. And it was Ashka Fenon Caribbean News. Now, this shows that as you know, January, yes, we have laws in place against marijuana, but those girls were still out there with that video. And as Senator Remy mentioned, we hope now that we are now kind of laying back and opening up the doorway, this wouldn't go further. Again, I must quote also the Guardian Wesley Gibbons article, July 21st, 2016, where he looked at the Inter-American Drug Abuse Control Commission by the Organization of the American States. And again, it looked at the fact that the regional, the number of students, you know, using alcohol, using drugs on the whole, the regional average is 8.8%. And Mr. Vice President, you find that when we looked at this regional average, we found that first use was really like 13 years people who use either alcohol or marijuana.
The argument in terms of the effect on young people has been made with several statistics being brought forward by several senators. So what you're essentially doing is rehashing the same point, albeit using maybe different statistics this time. So what I would ask you to do is there's no need to go over the effect on young people anymore. Anything else that you have by way of new arguments coming in, I invite you now to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. What I'm saying is, if we want to see how are we going to get these youths, I'm trying to say how could we get them? How could we get them to know which youths need the help? Because the figures showed they are there. And some of these children now, when we looked at the trend of questioning, when they asked the children, do you think the effects of marijuana use is very harmful? And in 2010, 71% said yes. In 2013, 63%. So right now, you're having children under the perception that marijuana is not that harmful. And I must think, you know, when I looked at some of these videos they have with certain rap artists, and they're smoking the marijuana, they have the woman in scanty clothing, that, when I look at those things, it's doing a disservice to our youth. And I'm thinking somehow, we have to look into that, because what the youth put into their mind is what they gravitate towards. So if they see this, Mr. Vice President, they may gravitate towards that side lifestyle. So I'm looking at how could we now get help for those youths. I'm thinking, should we now have a policy where if parents know their children are using marijuana, and somehow they may be ashamed to come out and say that, and the state has provided good places for them, safe places for them, where the children can go and really get help. But the duty of the state is to provide clean, safe places. I am thinking we may have to develop a system where the parents now will be held responsible in the sense that, if you catch the kids and they don't come out and seek help, that we somehow give that parents a greater degree of responsibility. So that is one aspect. The other aspect I'm looking at, children who also are in a home where the parents are smoking weed and openly in front of them. If we are going with encouraging education for children, we have to now tell children, look, this is, we are telling them we are opening up the laws, but we have to tell them this is harmful to you. And the harm that it does to you, you should be able to report that to a social worker in school. And somehow we now to investigate. Now, if a parent wants to smoke in his own bedroom, locked up in that environment, no problem. Once his smoke is not going to affect the kids. And we can do urine testing on the children after a period of time to see if they have any levels of THC in their system. Mr. Vice President, I want to look at the fact that, even though you found that certain jurisdictions had opened opened the use of marijuana. What I must say is that there are a lot of problems with marijuana with cognitive and psychomotor functions, and safe driving was already established there, and I'm saying that I want to support what my colleague said about driving. There are cases where the use of the marijuana and the alcohol has an additive effect and causes a greater degree of distress. And I just want to look at the Cannabis Policy Framework, October 2014, the Center of Addiction and Mental Health from Canada, Mr. Vice President, where they claimed that frequent cannabis use has found by many studies to be associated with mental illness. So all these are problems we are looking at, the exacerbation, and the fact that people may have a pre-existing vulnerability. If you have schizophrenia in your family, this can trigger a mental illness. So not everyone who will use the marijuana, but it's also found that people who already have an existing mental illness, it can be affected. And it also went on to other details, Mr. Vice President, like cannabis smoke and the tar could also increase the risk of bronchitis and cancer. So there's the physical effects, there's the psychological effects, and in this study, they claim that there's a 9% dependence of cannabis. So if there's a risk of dependence, other studies, I didn't get that actual dependence. This Canadian study, this Canadian report showed that. We have to provide avenues where people, if they are addicted, they can seek help. So this is another thing that we may have to work at. The government has implemented 3 cessation clinics for cigarette smoking. What I'm saying, that could be expanded for if people have that problems with even alcohol and with marijuana. Those clinics should be expanded. There's a recommendation I give because it's staffed with some members who learn about addiction. So we need to open those places to a greater degree of drugs that are available. So NADAP does a good effect in education, but even though they are education, we are still seeing an increase in youth. So something is still not the dangers of drugs is still not reaching to certain individuals if the youths are willing to try it. So, Mr. Vice President, the risk is there, dependence, and according to this article, and I'm saying what I want to look at, the fact that there are so many health risks that mentioned, and problems with also memory, attention, and IQ in young persons. All those are effects that, it will affect. They have all those ill effects. So, I am saying that knowing the ill effects, being in the medical field, I have a natural tendency to say, no, I don't like this, to support this. And you see, I just wanted to look at, I think the Senator Batiste mentioned that about driving, something about the driving and the marijuana, the effects, and Senator Richards mentioned that. But there were 2 large European studies which definitely found that drivers with THC also would have that. Okay, so then what I may want to look at, Mr. Vice President, is the fact that we are looking at the reasons given to go into this piece of legislation. And I think when I heard the reason was because the magistrates had a lot of work to do, they were overburdened, there were a lot of persons in prisons. I wondered, you know what I wondered is if you have the magistrate, now I don't know if the magistrates are doing their jobs, if there's enough magistrates, if successive executive didn't put things in place or systems in place to make the magistrates work in a more efficient manner, because I've been here in night courts for years now, and probably if you had a night courts and an efficient system, we would not have had that backlog, and we would not have all those persons in remand yard, and we may not have need to come to this legislation. But a quick justice may have been able to roll them out. So if one of the reasons was because, the backlog would be, the 8,000 something a year backlog would be cleared, I'm saying, but if we are now getting more magistrates, it means the system should be running more efficient, and that may not come into place, because the greater amount of magistrates, I think is 43, may have been able now to start to clear that backlog, and especially if we are taking preliminary inquiries out of their domain, you find out they might have been able to deal with this. But so as it may, it came here. So I'm thinking, yes, I looked at the fact that the increase in the cases that they have would put a level of burden on them and on society and on the people. But what I'm saying, I look at the backlog and I look at it and I refer it as backlog madness. Why was this situation allowed to reach that level? Why were things not put in place? Yes, the Chief Justice did appeal before for legislation. So that means I'm looking at the trend, Mr. Vice President. Is it that every time there's a glut of cases of a certain caliber, that next 3 years we'll come and say, well, let's decriminalize it? Suppose right now, persons now start to use cocaine. And you find cocaine possession now comes starts to increase in the court cases. And next 2 years, there are about 8,000 cocaine cases in the magistrate's court. Would we now come and say, well, let's decriminalize that because it's clogging up the system? No, I'm thinking we can't continue this way. We have to have better, efficient services that could clear up any sort of backlog before it reaches this state where it causes a strain on the magistrate and a strain on the person. So therefore, by freeing up the judicial strain, which may be good for the magistrates, it's going to put a strain on the health system. It's going to put an overload on the health system, because I'm thinking if more persons are coming in to St. Anne's, we will have now to see, so we might be helping the magistrate, but we have to help the health system. We have to put the things in place. And what I'm thinking is government has been doing things. We see an adolescent clinic now in Mount Hope. Mount Hope Hospital is an adolescent clinic on a Saturday. It's a free clinic. So when these children have stress, they can come there and talk. And we need to open more adolescent clinics. We look at anywhere under 18, we could deal with those free clinics. So you have a problem with your children at school, bullying, you can come and speak. There's a Dr. Pemberton there, Saturday, free clinic. Yeah, so this is a beautiful initiative, but we need more right through the country. We need it in Tobago, because we have to look for any sort of fallout. So therefore, again, forensic complain that they are overworked, but if forensic had the staff and were working better, we may not have had that complaint to have to reach a situation. So therefore, I looked at the ill effects of the marijuana, and I want to now weed out, well, I shouldn't say weed out, but I want to weed out the good effects, right? Good. So, yes, no pun intended. I want to weed out the good effects. So I've been trained to be, not like marijuana or drugs, because, Mr. Vice President, talking about the drugs and the extension in the schedules that I think the Minister of Health and the Minister of National Security added on ketamines. But ketamine is now used, Mr. Vice President, for depression. So for resistant depression, ketamine is now coming back into the medical world. So we are going to be using that soon, if you know, in Trinidad. Then also, I make mention of the fact that with these drugs, we have to be a little careful. There's a drugs for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, a drug called Concerta, Ritalin. Those are like amphetamines. And I've seen people abuse it. They have come to me sometimes with all sorts of Nancy story. Adults, doc, I think I have adult attention deficit disorder. And they come with all the symptoms, every single symptoms. And you right away, you know, they are just doing that to get a prescription for Concerta, which is an amphetamine. So we have to look what's going on out there. People want to study, will come and try to get prescriptions for those things. So those are things. And I want to make mention to the fact, Mr. Attorney General, there's the mushrooms, the psychedelic mushrooms available down here now. They call it shrooms, and psilocybin is the active ingredient. It causes hallucination. So, you know, this is something that, you know, we have to look. It's on the market here. The fact that ecstasy and other drugs were included in the schedule is something to be commended, because as we remember, the Zesta pills, we were not able to touch, and now we are able to touch that because of that. So I want to make mention now, Mr. Vice President, that, you know, I think that coming in with my training and coming in with my concerns, coming in with my, you know, bias that I had, I said, well, you know, I'm now getting a softer touch. I'm now being educated. And I must say, part of the education had to do with my wife, because she wrote 2 columns in the Express, Dr. Shireen Cologne. I will just quote what she had here. And sometimes over a cup of tea, we will have discussions, things about the nation, about children, about how to help. And while she was supporting this, I was always against it. So we always had that discussion. And she had, and I want to just read one article, Mr. Vice President, which she wrote on the Express in 1934-16, when she actually looked at the economic benefit of it. And she said, you know, and even Jamaica, she said, you're allowed to cultivate 5 or fewer plants on the premises. But she mentioned the cases in Colombia. Colombia. She mentioned the, in Canada, medical marijuana was legalized. She mentioned Czech Republic. So a lot of cases she had mentioned, and actually she was actually pushing for it, and she said there would be great economic benefits. And she, you know, there's medicinal benefits. 23 medicinal benefits according to the research. When I was in Jamaica years ago, as a student in it was around 1982, they were researching glaucoma. So yeah, so it was there, and now we have all the benefits of it, that it could for pain, and persons mention it. And lately now, what we found is, why she likes this is that a woman in New Jersey was making a claim to get this for menstrual cramps. So again, being a gynecologist, she would have that sort of interest in serving her clients. So therefore, what I'm looking at, the benefits were there, 23 benefits, and she mentioned that. And again, there was another article where she had on the 15th of July, 2018, and she was a little critical of our Prime Minister, I must say. Because what she was saying, and I just like to quote a little bit. What she said is that she was very disappointed to hear the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, say that any move to the criminalization of marijuana is not a priority. And he said that in an article which I have here, that he actually make mention to the fact after he had a meeting, I think, with the CARICOM nations, and it's an article listed in Loop News, 12th of July 2018, decriminalization marijuana, not a priority, says PM. So this article, it was not a priority, but then I think the Attorney General said that under prompting, under guidance, the Prime Minister changed his mind. So, you know, so, and it is here now in the book. So too, with prompting from my wife, with prompting from world literature, with prompting from what's going on in the world, and looking at the benefits of it, Mr. Vice President, I have looked at it and I've seen that there are certainly major benefits. So the economic benefits are there. In her article, she mentioned the revenue and millions people get in Colorado and whatnot. So the benefits would have been there. So I am convinced there are some economic benefits, but we are looking to see if there'll be any fallout in the emergency rooms. People coming in, people need medical treatment, people need more hospital stay. This is what we'll have to look at locally if that happens. And Mr. Vice President, I must say that when I looked at some of the other benefits, what I looked at in this actually piece of legislation and the move to decriminalize is the fact that, yes, there's great medicinal benefits, because even things like aspirin came from a plant called white willow. Quinine, which was used for malaria, which saved millions of lives probably, quinine, are now used for foot cramps. That came from a plant again. So you had penicillin, was derived from a mold, penicillin antibiotic. The digoxin, which for heart failure, foxglove plant. So the medicinal benefits of these plants are there. And marijuana definitely has the benefits. So anti-cancer drugs, Mr. Vice President, there's certain anti-cancer drugs that came from plants that we are using. So therefore, the benefits are there. Definitely the benefits are there. And what actually I looked at is the fact that, if we are going to look at the medicinal use of marijuana, some of the guidelines we were getting from other countries, they were saying actually the clinical guidelines for use of medicinal cannabis products in Queensland, August 2018. And a significant note they have here, because a lot of persons are saying, let us just use the marijuana derivative for a lot of ills. But what they said here, Mr. Vice President, medicinal cannabis should be considered only where conventional treatments has been tried and proven unsuccessful in managing the patient's symptoms. It should be noted that medicinal cannabis is not considered as a first-line therapy for any indication. So this is their opinion. We could look at it different, because remember there are different levels of the, different types of the active compound. And Mr. Vice President, I just want to mention to the fact that the active compound that we look at as causing the hallucinations or the effect was the THC, which we know is the tetrahydrocannabinol, and that actually causes the effects where you have the psychoactive effect. The CBD actually is the cannabidiol is the one that has a lot of promise in the medical fields. But now we are finding there's a cross mixture. Some may counter the effects of others, and we find that the THC, Mr. Vice President, may help nausea, vomiting, pain, and the CBD may help different conditions like pain and seizures and anxiolytic effects. I have patients, Mr. Vice President, who I have tried on an antidepressive drug called Paxil for years for OCD. Never worked. They will come in clinic, a guy comes in and he will have to tap on the ground 3 times before he comes in the room. When he's leaving, he taps 3 times. He came in clinic about 6 months ago and walked in and sat. And he said, Doc, I ain't using your Paxil. I said, what's going on? He started marijuana. Now, I am not condoning it, but I'm saying I saw results in an obsessive compulsive patient. This relaxed him totally, that he didn't feel he was responsible for the world. So there are benefits. And what is strange, Mr. Vice President, we know we can get the cannabinoids from plants, from the marijuana, but our own body produces cannabinoids. Our own body produces it. So it's a part of us. So you have different types of these cannabinoids, the phyto from the marijuana plant. Sure, yeah. And also our own body and the synthetic. And I think Senator Rishi Tripathi mentioned that it's a no-no for the synthetic cannabinoids, because this is the one that causes a great deal of harm. So, Mr. Vice President, I want to just look at the fact that, if you are now, another turning point that caused me to want to support this is the atrocious conditions that exist in prison. I cannot have young men in prison under those conditions. And the 2017 Joint Select Committee on Human Rights and Equality and Diversity, the 3rd session of Parliament, they give some horrendous conditions that exist in prison. So I don't think it's fair for persons to be there, young men to be there in these type of conditions. So I'm thinking because of this, the greater harm, I think, and violation of human rights, a person committing minor cannabis possession, it will outweigh the others. I'm thinking we have to get those individuals out of there. And this is another reason why I look to the fact that decriminalization, the overcrowding, to support that. Also, again, as a physician, I'm guided by the World Health Organization. Now, the World Health Organization asks are asking us for years to restrict alcohol use. They tell us about the harmful use of alcohol, and this is something I think we have to go after that. But the World Health Organization recently had a support given where the WHO, to reclassify cannabis under UN treaties, the World Health Organization Expert Committee on Drug Dependence has recommended the reclassification of cannabis under UN drug treaties. This was a press release in 1st of February 2019. So even the World Health Organization, who as a physician, I try to follow their guidelines, they have suggested the reclassification, and they also mentioned the fact that we have been wrong about the harms of marijuana. World Health Organization. So this is one of the reasons I would have supported that. Mr. Vice President, one thing I must make mention to is the fact that I was concerned about the use in work, but Senator Batiste actually mentioned the use in work, how they are going to have policies, how they are going to at least check for the THC levels in certain individuals. And I'm saying that even if there's a pilot who's going into a plane and his eye looks red and I figure his eye, there should be some mechanism that we can call a body and say, look, stop that guy and do some sort of test on him. There's privacy issues. But if you're signing a contract for certain positions, I'm thinking spot checks and spot blood checks should be something that we have to say we will put that in line. And I'm looking at smoking in a public place, and I'm thinking if we are going to allow smoking in a public place, there was a concert recently where an artist came in from Jamaica, and certain individuals were there, and people said they're smoking marijuana, and nothing was done. Something I want to mention. If you're looking at smoking in a public place, we may have to declare certain concerts that that concert might be smoking may be allowed in that place, rather than cause a big confusion after where police will go and raid and lock up people. So certain concerts may have to say, no, I would want to go to the concert, but I wouldn't want to smell the weed. So if you have 2 days of a concert, one day, a smoke day, you could go and smoke. You are going to a ticket where you could go and anybody there could be there, but the other day, I can go in and enjoy that same artist. So we have to consider allowing certain events and concerts that privilege for persons who want to go there under that environment. I'll say in closing, I must say we need to get a mechanism in place, mental health officer out there, ambulance service out there, center and hospital, the substance abuse prevention treatment need to be expanded. There's a group called MAD, Mothers Against Drugs. They will tell you about the plight they have dealing with these individuals. They need to be engaged, Mr. Attorney General, in any sort of the future legislation we are bringing in. Because the other piece of legislation I think is needed to tie into this one. And I'm thinking, if they are, you will hear their plight, and definitely when you hear them, we will have to create things that will help them. Again, we need to educate doctors about CBD, because a lot of us were not trained in the drugs, in that, and the effects and whatnot. So there's a re-educational system that we have. So in conclusion, I'm thinking, we are given this legislation, but we'll have to be a little careful. We don't know what's coming around the corner, what dangers are there, and I'm thinking that we have to prepare for it and safeguard our youths by putting certain things in place. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Mr. Vice President, I thank you very much for allowing me to join this debate on the amendments to the Dangerous Drug Act, which is being termed the Marijuana Act or the Marijuana Bill in Trinidad and Tobago. And it is a piece of legislation that people in various quarters of Trinidad and Tobago have been looking forward to in terms of the debate. It is on record, and I will repeat for this Senate, the UNC's position, the United National Congress, the opposition's position, is in support of decriminalization of marijuana in small amounts and the legalization of marijuana for medical purposes. Mr. Vice President, behind every piece of legislation must be a philosophy. You must have something that would allow you to launch in a particular direction. I don't think the government has been very clear in terms of where they are going next with this, and if you would allow me to call it the marijuana bill. That I think has to be clarified. In fact, in the middle of last year, I remember the Attorney General in response to the media making a statement indicating that his office was working on legislation to treat with the legalization or decriminalization of marijuana. And then the Prime Minister made a statement contradicting him. And today we see an about turn. And I feel that that is in part due to the response from the public based on the opposition making it very clear our position on marijuana, decriminalization, and medical use. So, Mr. Vice President, we know the UNC's philosophy and proposal for legislation, the two major parts. One has to do with the decriminalization of small amounts, and the other has to do with medicinal use. So first of all, I think we have a sort of agreement with regards to the decriminalization of the small amounts. A number of members in the Senate have spoken about the at-risk youth. The young person who could get lost in the prison system, and it's not only a young person, but any vulnerable person. And I listened to the stories being put forward by members on the government bench in particular, identifying perhaps the most at-risk group as the young African male. But the truth is that one marijuana joint would not be responsible for all the things in the stories that are being put forward. There are a number of social ills that are responsible for the situations that are being identified. And I think the PNM has systematically failed to address the social ills that affect the young African male who is at risk. So to come and give these stories in isolation without pointing to policies to empower these at-risk youth. Mr. Vice President, Paul Richards is was once a young African male. He spoke about, and we have shared a conversation. I mean, he would have gone to a school that was mentioned in the debate. Oh, I know you want me to call the name of the school. I ain't giving all free ads. But I know you are very proud of your alma mater, Hillview College. Men like Paul Richards and others who would have gone to prestige schools, or any school for that matter, would encounter marijuana. There are young men who use marijuana, and not only men and women who use marijuana, and it does not affect their lives in that manner. There are people who are around others, their peers who use marijuana, and they never end up even ever smoking a joint. So it is not that the young African male is just automatically going to fall into this group. So I think we need to stop trying to play that game. Let's not pretend that it is one joint that could cause this downfall. There are many other social ills that we have to protect our at-risk youth, whether it is male, female, regardless of the race. And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice President, I remember reading a story once of a man who was sentenced to prison for 3 months. He was serving a sentence for 3 months for possession of marijuana. But I don't know what happened, and he died in prison. In fact, he was beaten and sodomized from the report. And his wife, the report I read was where his wife was awarded, I think, $750,000 in damages. And he was in prison for possession of marijuana, a 3-month sentence. And with legislation like this, he would not have had reason to be in prison. So these are the situations that might be extreme, but would have an impact on a number of people's lives. Many would have mentioned, and I think we have full support with regards to the crowded prison, the state resources used for imprisonment, taking prisoners from prison to court, the overburdened court system, the justice getting the wheels of justice to turn faster. Those are, I think, reasons why many are in support of the decriminalization of small amounts. But, Mr. Vice President, marijuana, I really feel that this debate is slanted in a very outdated view of what marijuana is to society. This bill seems to presume that marijuana is for smoking, and smoking is bad for your health, and that's about it. You could go to prison and so on. This is a real old archaic view. And here I want to touch on marijuana for medical purposes. There are a slew of products that are extracts. I'm not even speaking of the plant itself, that are extracts. Members before me would have mentioned CDB oil, well, what is known as CDB oil, which is an extract, but it is used for seizures, such as epilepsy, neuroprotection when it comes to Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, anxiety, pain relief, acne treatments, skin treatments, even cancer treatment. These are not treatments that rely on the smoking of marijuana to reach into your system. They are very, very advanced ways of extracting and including these in regular methods, such as creams, injections, and so on. So I felt that all the members thus far would have taken a view that is very, we have not taken a modern view in terms of the uses that the products of marijuana have advanced to be. Mr. Vice President, I want to also ask, when I speak about what the uses are presently, I also want to add, some members may have mentioned before, with regards to the definition of cannabis, and this is again relevant to what we allow the uses to be for. In the definition, it includes any part of a plant, growing or not, its seeds, any compound, salt, mixture, extraction, and so on. And it does not include fiber produced from the stalk of the plant, oil or cake made from the seeds of the plant. And I don't know why that is specific in terms of the seed versus the leaves or other parts of the plant, because in cooking, somebody mentioned bakery items, and a lot of people hear stories about brownies, but it's not only brownies. It also mentions sterilized seeds of the plant which are incapable of germination. Hemp oil is extracted from the seeds. The brownie and bakery items may be popular based on what people read. But the truth is that, of course, even sweets and lollipops, gummy bears, and so on, marijuana can be infused. In fact, even local sweets, there are people who make local sweets such as korma, barfi, tulum, sugar cake, with extract from the marijuana plant. Food, stews, pastas, the most modern of dishes, can be infused with marijuana oil and with other products. So when we take this view that, somebody is going to eat a marijuana brownie and get high and, fall down, or have hallucinations, that is a very archaic view. The question I want to ask is with regards to the inclusion of marijuana products and marijuana extract. It is not only oil or cake made from the seeds of the plant. That is very limited in terms of what marijuana products are used for at present. So that is an area I think we have to shed a little more light on And certainly, I think had this bill gone to a joint select committee, we would have had a little more opportunity to get feedback to allow us to properly capture those things. So, Mr. Vice President, I want to move now to another area. The Minister of Labour gave a very comprehensive contribution. The Minister pointed out the shortcomings in terms of where there would be holes in legislation affecting workers. But there were no recommendations, and I suppose that will come at a later date. In terms of the OSH Act, Organization, Safety and Health, because of what intoxication and dangerous drugs would have been defined as in the past, intoxication under the OSH Act may have to be defined differently. How then do you determine if someone is under the influence of marijuana at the workplace and if it's affecting their ability to function? So if someone is under the influence of alcohol, for example, there is a breathalyzer test. If someone is under the influence of marijuana, at present, the police may rely on the smell, the slurred speech, if they have glassy eyes or bloodshot eyes. If someone is driving, for instance, under the influence, working under the influence, operating heavy machinery, and where their motor skills will be affected, what reliable scientific method do we have to determine that that person's level of marijuana intake in their body at the time is enough to affect their motor skills or so on? So the alcohol test, with alcohol you have a breathalyzer. The Attorney General did mention that the government is exploring the importation of a machine that could detect the CDB on a person's, the user's breath. Those machines are very much in the early stage in terms of testing. The THC levels, sorry. So many of those, I think what is very important is, in addition to the workplace, as mentioned by the Minister of Labour, accidents or people who are operating heavy machinery, where marijuana could be considered an intoxicant versus a medical use or something, right? And where a person could be committing an offense if they are under the influence, whether it is similar to alcohol, but under the influence of marijuana, so that it affects their functioning. At present, the test for marijuana is a urine test. But a urine test would determine if you would have used marijuana. It would not determine if you are under the influence at the time. So a person who used marijuana a particular day for an entire week after, it would show up in their urine, but that doesn't determine that they are, in fact, under the influence. So the new breathalyzer, which is being developed in a university in Pittsburgh, that would detect the THC on a user's breath, is an advancement in terms of enforcing for DUIs, where especially where accidents and so on is concerned. It's a very new technology, Mr. Vice President, and it uses nanotechnology, sensors and so on. But are we there yet? And if we are, we have to, along with this legislation, determine what is the level that we are going to consider as a nation to be the legal limit, just as we have done for alcohol. So allowing the use of marijuana, you must have those mechanisms in place, those safeguards in place. And that will bring me to another point later with regards to when we plan to proclaim this bill. Another thing that was mentioned in the contribution of the Minister of Labour was the question of whether medical plans will cover the where prescriptions are given to patients who are employees recommending medical marijuana. And this is why I feel that the issue of medical use of marijuana has not been sufficiently explored, because there will be an impact on other very important laws, existing laws in our country. And that is an area I think that the government's silence will cause a lot of cracks for people to fall through. So that is an area I think, as I said again, our Joint Select Committee may have been able to flesh out a little better. Sticking to medical use, Mr. Vice President, there are many who would gasp at the thought of a parent giving marijuana to a child because of the view that marijuana is an intoxicant. It is a drug, not a medical drug. So you have the use of marijuana as an intoxicant, but you have the medical use of marijuana and marijuana products, not as a hallucinogenic, not as something that is harmful to the body or that interferes with the mind. But this is an area, again, where I feel the GSC would have been able to help us flesh around it. I remember being, in fact, part of a GSC that the report did come to Parliament, so I think I'm permitted to mention. Pharmaceutical experts and the UE Medical Sciences Center came before the GSC and they spoke about their research. And they didn't speak about marijuana alone. They spoke about herbal medication across the board. And I really think, so now we have the question of the views expressed by many in terms of concern. So when from the moment you hear that an adult wants permission to give their child marijuana, it makes it sound as though it is similar to an adult giving a child alcohol, right? At present, there are laws that protect children under the age of 18 from the sale of alcohol, the sale of cigarettes, because those are intoxicants. I am not aware that the present law says anything about the sale or the possession or an adult giving a child, person under the age of 18, marijuana to use as an intoxicant. And that is something I think we have to include because just as cigarettes and alcohol, the use as marijuana in terms of as an intoxicant is dangerous. But we also have to carefully balance that with the medical use, the use of the oil. There are people who boil the root of the plant to use for asthma, for colds, for medical issues where inflammation is concerned, like sinuses and so on. And that goes alongside, in many parts of the country, goes alongside the use of other herbs and other bushes like fever grass and Christmas bush, bacano leaf, zebra peak, and all these things that people boil when they have the cold, the common cold, the flu. And we hear a lot about asthma. You have people who use Timawi bush, the Mary Mary close your door, people who use turmeric. So all of these could come together, because if a part of the plant is used in that manner, it is not an intoxicant. And there you would have the question of a child being given a marijuana extract or product or tea as a medication. So that has to be carefully balanced as opposed to giving a child marijuana as an intoxicant. So, Mr. Vice President, I really feel that the legislation is very, or maybe the view of the Senate, because I think we, the government side, the opposition, we are involved in politics. The independent bench, they too have their professional lives, and we would all sometimes want to say what is politically correct and to speak on behalf of the majority. But in doing so, sometimes we tend to repeat the cliched views. And I think this is an excellent opportunity for us to take a modern view, because some of the recommendations in this legislation is taken from countries that are very, very far advanced. Countries who legalized or decriminalized marijuana 20 and 30 years ago. So we are extracting from their legislation and still keeping our very old view. So, Mr. Vice President, I wasn't at all impressed with some of the things that were being put forward. I felt that we were just kind of going in the same old cliched circles. Because, as I said before, the legislation presumes that the primary use of marijuana is for smoking. The view is that smoking is bad for your health, but we have not considered that marijuana and marijuana extracts are eaten, it's in drinks, it's in medicine, it's used for making clothes. Part of the definition of cannabis indicates in the legislation does not include fiber produced from the stalk of the plant. And the fibers are actually used in making cloth and clothing and, in fact, many other products. So that is an area we also have to explore, and time would not allow me to go into much detail, but I just feel it's important to mention that. And that was actually the only use of the male plants that was initially proposed by the government. That, however, Mr. Vice President, does not mean that we do not have to balance the exposure of marijuana as a drug. The permission to have between 60 and 100 grams of the plant and 10 to 14 grams of the cannabis resin. Here's what one of my concerns was. I would use the example of a university student. A university student who is allowed to have between 60 and 100 grams, that is between 40 to about 40 cigarettes, marijuana cigarettes. If a student, whether it is a university or a secondary school student, has this and is selling this on the school compound, whether it is the university campus or wherever. I want to use a university as an example because I don't want to complicate it with the matter of people under the age of 18. So I'm using a university where you have people over the age of 18 and someone has these cigarettes on their possession, and every day they go with 40 and they sell. There's no law against having that amount. And I am wondering if we are ready for that volume and if we should have a little more restrictions and guidelines with regards to the volume that one person is allowed, because that amount would be for the particular point when they are arrested or searched and so on, versus a person who may have a week's supply or a month's supply in their home, in their private home. And I have to ask if the laws concerning the possession of narcotics around a school will be applicable here, because a person at present could be charged with trafficking if they are near to a school for a much smaller amount than if they are outside of a school zone. So that is an area, Mr. Vice President, that I want us to bear in mind. Mr. Vice President, I also want to just take the opportunity, separate from what I have already spoken about, to share background in terms of a balance in the Islamic perspective. Maybe part of my thought and thinking on marijuana has to do with my upbringing in Islam. And I read the Islamic perspective as published by, which was mentioned, a paper which was mentioned by the leader of the opposition bench. And for the minister who is inquiring opposite, yes. She thought I was a Hindu. I don't know for what reason. So in Trinidad and Tobago, you know, my father was born a Hindu, converted to Islam, married my mother under Islamic rites, and raised us as children in Islam. So I hope that assists you. But I'm sure if the minister has questions, she'll make a contribution. But Mr. Vice President, I don't want to be distracted, but I'm just sharing that because I read the Islamic perspective that the leader of the opposition bench mentioned earlier, I just want to, for the edification of the members here and nationwide, to share that perspective. Muslims who live in a country recognize the rule of law. In Islam, some aspects of life are legislated as permissible or halal, while others are deemed as haram or not permissible. Yes,
Senator Mark may have spoken to it earlier, but if you can, just repeat the source, given that you're doing it.
Yes, I will provide the information to Hansard. So these haram or halal things can range from a formal acts of worship to mundane daily acts of living, including food and drink. Marijuana is deemed as haram or not permissible as it belongs to a group of substances known as khamr in Arabic, which mean things that cloud the intellect. So here, where marijuana is considered as an intoxicant, it certainly is an abomination, according to the glorious Quran. The Prophet indicated that everything that befogs the mind is an intoxicant, and every intoxicant is impermissible. So there's no way that marijuana as an intoxicant could be permissible in Islam. So as this statement indicates, all substances that befogs the mind is not permissible. So therefore, the effects of an intoxicant such as alcohol and marijuana, where it causes the inability to control one's minds, one's limbs, senses, and emotions, the inability to perceive reality from the imagined as a hallucinogen. However, the balance is that the medical use of CBD oil from an Islamic point of view is such that its use may be permissible under certain conditions. And these include, 1, the need for using the CBD oil medicinally is of absolute necessity, such that there is no other substance providing the relief needed. And there are medical cases where no other relief may be found. 2, the use of the CBD oil will only be to the extent that is required to bring relief. And just like any other pharmaceutical that should not be abused, such as painkillers and other pharmaceutical products, it should not be abused. 3, the use of the CBD oil will not result in other problems worse than the relief obtained. So, Mr. Vice President, I think the statement was actually encouraging the government to consider a faith-based approach in the issue of decriminalization of cannabis. And there are other religions that share this perspective. So I think it's important, Mr. Vice President, to have everything in balance. For this reason, I think that this bill, Mr. Vice President, might be a little more than an election thing. I think that the conversation about marijuana and the positive response from the public has prompted the government to put this bill on the agenda. And because of that, there are a number of areas that have not been fully fleshed out. When will this bill be proclaimed? Is this bill coming to appease the public for the upcoming general election? When will you, is the government going to wait for the Cannabis Control Bill 2019 to go through the process in the Parliament and for both bills to be proclaimed together? They work hand in hand. I think Senator Mark already mentioned that this bill and the Cannabis Control Bill should have come together so that you will have unison when you are going forward. So I want to warn the population, be on the lookout. The government might hit us a 6 for 9 when it comes to this legislation. It appears to me that the government just decided to roll with the hype, no pun intended. When it comes to the implementation, you jump on a bandwagon of something that is popular because the government has been getting blows for a lot of things, a lot of issues, a lot of lack of performance, the high crime rate and so on, the inability to respond even to the flooding. But I don't want to get started on where the government not performing. I won't finish today. So I want to ask the government to not be about the hype. The growing support for the decriminalization of marijuana, the legalized use of marijuana, the permission to allow marijuana to be used for medical purposes. It has an impact on the customs regulations and so on. In fact, Mr. Vice President, there are products that you can purchase online, and if you use your credit card and you purchase it, it comes in your skybox, and it contains the CBD oil. I know people who order facial creams because they have bad acne, and it has CBD oil in it, and it has been allowed to come into the country through the skybox and so on. But can a person can a person or a business import these products now and distribute as they would a regular face cream or a regular or other products? So, Mr. Vice President, the putting forward of this legislation at this time might be the equivalent of what I saw happened in Sandy Grande. Thank you. The putting forward of the marijuana legislation, the cannabis, the legalization of the marijuana, the weed bill, whatever you want to call it, might just be the equivalent of what I saw in the local government elections, where people were putting money in P&M jerseys and distributing an election gimmick that did not cause the P&M to have victory. And I am warning that legislation such as this should not be used as an election gimmick. Let us sit as a responsible parliament and deal with both acts together. Let us deal with all the possible modern uses of cannabis. Let us sit with the stakeholders and look beyond cannabis as simply something to smoke. Let us have the Cannabis Control Bill together with this one, and let us have from the government an implementation, their plan to implement going forward. When will it be proclaimed? When will the other things that have an impact on this, the regulations that would encourage responsible use and reasonable use, have to be taken into consideration? Otherwise, Mr. Chairman, this is just a desperate attempt by the government to jump on a bandwagon that would allow them to get popular support, which I will not support. Thank you.
Government business.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for the opportunity to contribute to this dangerous drug amendment Bill 2019. Mr. Vice President, the resume of Anthony Isidore Smart has on page 4 this paragraph, and I would read. It says, drafted and successfully piloted the landmark Dangerous Drugs Bill 1990 through both houses of Parliament. Mr. Ramesh Lawrence Maharaj, SC, was appointed a temporary senator by the opposition leader, Mr. Basdev Pandey, specifically to oppose the passage of the bill. And then it says the opposition supported the passage of the bill. That is the act that we seek to amend today. And the first point I want to make, Mr. Vice President, is that we are here 28 years late. 28 years late. You see, Anthony Isidore Smart was replaced by Keith Sobian from my community. And for those of you who don't know, I come from a place where marijuana has grown in abundance through no fault of ours. The soil seemed to be perfect for it. And from Guayaguayari, Trinity Hills in Guayaguayari, straight through the Guayaguayari forest, through Rio Claro, Ecclesville, up to Navet, Kush, and Bish, marijuana has flourished. And in electing Keith Sobian as Member of Parliament for Otwa Mayaro, my community was really investing in an Attorney General who we felt will give effect to Section 4 of the Dangerous Drugs Act. You see, that legislation was passed in a particular context, with extreme pressure, of course, from the United States as it battled with its own cocaine trade. But in that legislation, Section 4 provided a carve-out for the Minister of Health to issue licenses for, among other things, the cultivation of cannabis for medicinal purposes. So this is not new ground we are breaking here today. The first thing we are doing is that we are fixing something that should have been fixed 28 years ago. In my community, we thought that Sobian would quickly craft those regulations that will allow us to grow marijuana for medicinal purposes and for the Minister of Health to issue the licenses, and our trade on the East Coast in high-grade medicinal marijuana would have flourished. And Keith Sobian lasted until 1995 as Attorney General and MP, and he left without fulfilling our wishes. And it has remained in abeyance since. I'm really quite surprised at two things as I make my second point. One, that my friends on the other side are in love with medicinal marijuana. I'm surprised. And secondly, that my friend, Member Amin, has totally missed the bus on this legislation, but I will help her. I will help her get back on track. Because all you had to do from May 24, 2010 to whenever your term ended, September 7, 2015. No, but I'm just saying, all that had to be done was to give life to Section 4. You didn't need to pass any legislation as we're trying to do here. All you needed to do was to put in place, you see, I read from Mr. Smart's resume for you to understand that it is your ancestors in the UNC and our ancestors who found their way in NER, 86 to 91, that gave life to the regime. And all you had to do was to craft the regulation, because you obviously are experts in medicinal marijuana, and you did not do that. The second thing I would say in relation to that, in your enthusiasm is this issue of Prime Minister Dr. Rowley and his about turn on marijuana. Well, the English is a funny, funny language. That's why I love it. You see, timing is an important thing. It was July 21st, 2018, that Prime Minister said that marijuana is not a priority for the government. He did not say we do not intend to treat with marijuana and give effect to Section 4. He said it's not a priority. Because you see, none of you have referred to the quarter-inch or half-inch thick CARICOM Commission report. But 2 weeks after Dr. Rowley's statement, the Commission published its report. It's dated 3rd August 2018. You see, the Prime Minister understood fully. The Prime Minister understood fully that it was in 2014 that CARICOM, in the context and the recent tradition of developing model legislation for the region, the CARICOM commissioned work on this issue of marijuana 2014. And the Commission submitted a report dated 3rd August 2018. And it was not long after, it was another 3 weeks, when the Prime Minister said, we intend to decriminalize marijuana in the context of having received the report. In the context of having received the report. Because the Prime Minister recognized then, because in July 2018, he didn't just say it is not a priority, you know. He said a few words more. He said in the context of what some people would like us to do. You see, there was pressure to become a mini Colorado, because those who were knocking, and even my door was being knocked on by people who wanted to get into this marijuana for medicinal purposes thing. And I don't blame them as a business, because all they were seeing was the business of marijuana. This bill is not the business of marijuana. The next bill is. But people were pressuring because they wanted that avenue. And they saw that Jamaica and St. Vincent seemed to be ahead of us, and they wanted to do business in Trinidad. But if you follow the argument of Dr. Rowley in the other place on this bill, keeping in mind that he spoke on this bill, and his argument in September 2018 when he articulated the need to decriminalize, it was absolutely not on medicinal marijuana and commercialization of marijuana. Dr. Rowley has been on the record and very clear that this bill is about dealing with a historical problem of criminalizing conduct of a particular section of our community in a manner in which they were harmed beyond repair for life. And that is what he said. He said, when you look at the numbers, when you look at those who are in jail because they could not afford bail, when you look at those in jail for a 5-piece because they did not have access to justice, you saw a particular demographic. And I make no apologies because I've said it many times before. Those young men in jail resemble from head to toe my 2 sons who are now aged 25 to 21. And all my life, growing up in Rio Claro and traversing from Trinity Hills to Beach, I have seen many, many, many young black men, many of them, excellent sportsmen, brilliant craftsmen, people who could have worked offshore. As Amoco developed, a lot of men in my community could not work offshore because of a criminal record relating to the possession of a 5-piece of marijuana. And many of them were lost in jail. And when you look at the other side of the spectrum, because we weren't growing the weed for us, you know. We were quite happy with dashing and fish. We were sending the weed to the urban parts of this country, was feeding on marijuana, and to this day, in all those skyscrapers, is weed they burning in there. I could tell you, on the blocks in my community, all through Mayaro and Bish and Kush, I didn't see people smoke weed as much as I see people smoke weed in town. I smell more marijuana in this city than in Rio Claro, Mayaro, and Bish. And nobody could tell me I'm wrong about that. And when they got caught, CRD, Section 71, convicted, reprimanded, and discharged. Because you see, when you heel high, you could get a special track in justice in this country. You could get a special track. Because for most of those persons in urban areas, son in Presentation College, San Fernando, and son in QRC, and daughter in convent, Monday morning, your matter start and end, and you have no record. But it's Black Maria for my people and my community. And I thought that Keith Sobian would have fixed it for us, and he did not. Our community has produced 2 outstanding attorneys general, you know, Selwyn Richardson and Keith Sobian, and I thought that matter would have been fixed. And 28 years after, I'm happy to have made it from my community into the parliament to get this thing done, because in 2014, I told my community that I am confident that I will be a member of parliament when this matter of marijuana is being debated. The only thing that happened was I ended up in this house and not the other place. I'm happy to be here, because this is a historical wrong that is being redressed finally. And the Prime Minister had no about turn or anything like that. It was crystal clear that what ought to go forward first is not this matter of commercial production of marijuana and CDB oils and so on. I'll come to that. But this matter of decriminalization, dealing with pending matters, expunging the criminal record, and getting the pardons. He felt, and that is what he has been talking about, not the commercial side. I want to make that point. I want to say, Senator Amin has said it is not clear where the government is going next. She's gone into medicinal, and she says the government silence will cause a lot of things to fall into the crack. Well, the only thing that has fallen into the crack is Senator Amin's preparation. There are 2 bills, and I would not offend the standing orders by going into the other one. But it is the other bill. And when you talk about the Joint Select Committee and it's the perfect place and we should have the other bill deals with medicinal marijuana. It deals with the commercial side, the licensing regime, everything from the cultivation to the export and everything in between. That is what that bill does. And Dr. Rowley said priorities, he used the word priorities. And we offered to the opposition in the other place the opportunity to debate and complete both bills. And I was very, very pleased with my friends in the other place that they debated both bills. And based on the submissions that came from the opposition, the cannabis control bill was referred to a joint select committee, which we populated in our place today. And that deals with the medicinal marijuana and the commercialization that my friend Senator Amin talks about. And she talks about an entire bill, an entire GSC would have, well, that is where we're heading. And a time has been fixed for report to the House which is 29th February 2019, which I addressed earlier today, 2020, sorry, when we appointed. And it is not this bill, and it was never intended. This bill does not deal, this bill deals with cannabis in the form that you wish to have it in your possession and use it, and I'll come to that. But the issue of the CDB oil and so on is addressed and to say that the government does not have a plan. The government has a plan. The government has a plan which was to await the CARICOM Commission's report, make a determination of where we want to go in the context of what the others are doing and what the Commission recommends, go to public consultation, and I don't think any of you attended or have referred to the 6 consultations. And out of that, craft on the basis of what the public has said to us and what we as a government have the appetite to do, because this, you talk about election gimmickry and election. We could lose a lot of support as a government on account of this. We could lose a lot of support because we have not lost sight of the fact that certain faith-based groups and certain faiths are likely to be opposed to this. But we're not counting the votes. We are redressing a historical wrong once and for all. And we were doing what could have been done in 1990 and 91, 28 years later. And Senator Amin referred to the cannabis route and says, we've not provided for that. So that the first place I want to go in the bill, Mr. Vice President, is Section 4. And for the very first time, we are introducing a definition of cannabis. And this definition of cannabis means the plant and includes, and the plant, whether it is growing or not, whether it is growing or not. And you know why? Because some people have a bottle that could hold a whole plant. A whole plant. They will make the thing with that. I'm not going into the details until the bill passes. I don't want anybody go and interfere with my people. And it includes any part of the plant, whether growing or not, and that covers the root. So the 30 grams don't have to be weed in your pocket. Do not assume, and do not assume that possession means to smoke. I want to make it very clear to you, very, very clear to you, that I do not support smoking in any form, of anything. I do not. Thankfully, I suffer from allergies, and the only thing I'm really allergic to is cigarette smoke. And I do not support smoking, whether it's marijuana, tobacco, or anything else. But I understand that there are smokers in the country, and I understand that this 30 grams does not have to be, this is not, nowhere in this legislation do we say it is for the purpose of smoking. So your 30 grams could be your root, it could be the branch, it could be the seed, it could be all kind of things. You know, when we were growing up, it was easy for your parents to know if you're smoking weed or not. Because marijuana have, marijuana have when you have a spliff, the little seeds just pop with the heat and fall on your clothes. So when they're washing your clothes and they hang it up on the line and they see through, they see through it, especially when you go cinema and you light up in the cinema. But the seed is included. And when we get to 4C, that Senator Amin says we've not provided for, you see any compound, salt, mixture, extraction, derivative, product, syntacted or other preparation of the plant, any part of the plant, its seeds or the resin, everything is provided for. However you want your 30 grams, however you want to fix your 30 grams, you fix it. And that is what this bill addresses, this issue of personal possession, recognizing that let me tell you something. Why didn't we ban Boabandi? Why didn't we ban it? It's just as medicinal as marijuana. It's just as medicinal as marijuana. And there are a lot of things, the herbalist will tell you, there are a lot of things growing here that are more dangerous than cannabis. And this bill deals with things that, for example, ecstasy. Who knew that ecstasy could come into Trinidad and be distributed and sold all this time? All this time. Something like ecstasy. So this deals with possession and personal possession of cannabis in the defined form, which includes just about any form that my friend Senator Amin refers to. The second point I want to make, and of course the AG has referred to what was added in the other place, and I want to just address this issue on the definition of smoke. You see, in my opposition to smoking, I, for a short time, accepted this thing called vaping because I felt it was a comfortable alternative. You didn't have to deal with tobacco and allergies and so on. And it didn't take long for the medical community, the medical world, and all the experts now to tell us that vaping has single-handedly all the work that had been done on discouraging young people from smoking. Vaping has undone that. And that is why I am happy to see the definition of smoke include vaporize the substance and the use of an electronic smoking device. I wanted you to know that that is there so that those who vape should not be vaping cannabis in a public place. And eventually, I hope that as a country, we would eliminate this thing called vaping and not wait 28 years as we have waited to deal with cannabis as set out in Section 4 of the Act at that time. The third point I want to make is this matter that my friend Senator Mark grappled with, and some of his colleagues in like measure grappled with it, and that is this, using this decriminalization and legalization interchangeably. Well, the government decriminalized. We didn't legalize. Because if you legalize something, it is difficult but not impossible to put controls in place. For example, alcohol. I mean, we behave in this country, as they say, like alcohol is free sheet. But you can't buy as much alcohol as you want and carry it home. You need a permit. You can't buy alcohol any and anywhere. You can't consume it any and anywhere. There's a licensing regime for alcohol. And in decriminalizing this 30 grams, I want you to understand this bill in its full form, because we focus on the decriminalizing line and we're not paying attention to the other part which says the bill seeks to decriminalize the possession of not more than 30 grams of cannabis or not more than 5 grams of cannabis resin, and to create offenses which restricts the use of cannabis in specific instances. So that this is not the government, this is not a permit, a license for everybody to do what they want with marijuana as though it's dashing bush. This bill takes a very responsible approach in achieving a specific purpose while putting in some serious penalties for other aspects of possession of cannabis. That is what we're doing here. We are not saying that weed is safe, weed is good for you, weed is medicinal. Go ahead and do what you want. We have dealt with under 30 grams, and we have put in very clear provisions in relation to the criminal aspects of above 30 grams. And one of the things, like so many other pieces of legislation that comes to us, like the firearms bill, for example, in Clause 6, I am happy to see this. Clause 6 seeks to increase the penalties for the possession of and trafficking in dangerous drugs. So this is not free sheet. This is not the marijuana traffickers and growers license bill. This is to deal with a specific area that ought to have been dealt with in 1990, that had not been dealt with, that we're dealing with now, but also to ensure that the society is protected from those who go beyond possession for personal use and get into commercial cultivation and trafficking in marijuana in a manner that not only destroys our society, but destroys other places. And my colleague, Senator Cummings and Senator Young, dealt with the issues of discharge, expungement, and pardon. And as I've said, this is not just decriminalizing of 30 grams. It is dealing with, in the manner in which Senator Cummings explained, that we left people with a criminal record in Weiwei. And Weiwei, again, just like marijuana, the Weiwei was essentially in rural areas. It wasn't an urban thing. It wasn't an urban thing. And imagine living in a community where you can't have a piece of paper in your hand. Because if you have a piece of paper in your hand, police robbing you down. Police holding your hand out. I know, you know. Police appear with a fan belt and they want to read your hand to see who mark you have right down on your hand. A criminal. Imagine criminalizing. You can't get in the teaching service because you had a piece of paper with 24 written down on it. And police playing Weiwei, principal playing Weiwei, politician playing Weiwei, lawmakers busting mark. And having a piece of paper or having a mark written on your hand was a criminal matter that remained on your record. And this bill seeks, in a rare occasion, when a bill of this nature goes backwards, this bill goes backwards to deal with some of what is recorded on people's criminal record so that they could get a clean slate. And of course, when we talk about expunging and when we talk about dealing with persons who are incarcerated and pending charges and so on, somebody may be in jail or on remand yard for multiple charges and will still have to face the justice system for those matters which are not possession of under 60 grams, because the discharge and the expungement and the pardon relates only to matters which are 60 grams or less. Those matters which are non-marijuana, non-cannabis related will go on. But those which are related to the conduct that we are now trying to deal with are going to be able to move forward in their lives without the problems of it. Senator Mark, as usual, was very contradictory in whether he supports or does not support. So he held up the Jamaican model as a model that we should follow, and then said that legalization was a serious problem for the society, and then acknowledged that this is not a bill about legalization, but a bill about criminalization. And it's typical of my friend, but I believe that CDB oil will clear all the channels and allow you to put decriminalization and legalization. But I want to say something, Senator Mark. It is not accurate to say that Jamaica cannot export or Canada cannot export. Canada.
Bring the evidence.
I will refer you to Senator Mark because I know you love to read. I will refer you to CBC News, January 2nd, 2018, which reads, medical marijuana consumers in Prague ran in 2018 with a new Canadian import Tilray milled cannabis, a high THC marijuana product grown on Vancouver Island. The Czech Republic is just the latest nation to sell Canadian weed, joining Germany, Australia, New Zealand, and a growing list of other nations which are turning to Canada as a safe and legal source for medical-grade cannabis. I end the quote and inflict no more misery on you. And anticipating, of course, you would ask me about Jamaica. Jamaica has been in the news twice. The first is when in 2018, the Honorable Audley Shaw, colleague of my friend Minister Paula Gopi-Skoon, announced that Jamaica had its first legal export of medical marijuana extracted oil to Canada. The shipment to Canada was authorized through an import permit issued by the government of Canada through Healthcare Canada for Jamaica. And an export permit was issued by the Ministry of Health in Jamaica. The shipment marks the first step in positioning Jamaica as a medical marijuana hub for the world. And this was in 2018. And very recently, Jamaica announced that it had made its first shipment of marijuana, not an extract from marijuana. They announced that they did. And it is wrong to say that they have not exported. Just to repeat, Mr. Vice President, Mr. Audley Shaw, Minister of Industry and Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries in Jamaica. I didn't say it, so it is wrong to say that. As I close, Mr. Vice President, I understand my friends, I understand their anxiety. They would like to deal with everything at one point, at one time, but in a very comprehensive way. They would like to do all of that. But we understand how to do this. And the priority of the government, as articulated by the Prime Minister, is that we must deal with 30 grams and less, and to deal with the matters which are pending and the criminal records and so on. This bill seeks to do that. This bill allows for personal possession of less than 30 grams of cannabis in various forms. It is not restricted to smoking. It deals with this issue of public smoking in a public place. It deals with some of the workplace issues which would arise that my colleague Senator Jennifer Baptiste-Primus articulated about. And alongside this, in the work of a Joint Select Committee that this Senate populated today, the matter of the commercialization, cultivation, distribution, export, licensing of products related to cannabis, including medicinal marijuana and derivatives of the cannabis plant, would be addressed once the GSC completes its work, for which it has been given a 29 February 2020 deadline. Mr. Vice President, thank you very much.
Senator Vera.
Recently, I chided government for the apparent one-dimensional, heavy-handed approach to offenders. Lock them up, hit them hard. This is a welcome change, and government deserves credit for the effort. Now, if I seem at times to be making light in my presentation, it's either for dramatic effect or to keep things, on an even keel. I recognize that this can be a very contentious topic, all right? And it can involve some very deep sensitivities. So let me apologize up front if my words cause offense. It's not intended to be politically incorrect. I'm not trying to be flippant or disrespectful of anyone, any religion, or any section of the society. In my youth, my passion was martial arts. I wasn't into smoking cigarettes, getting drunk, or getting high on marijuana. I did not like being not in control of my mind and senses. My vices tended to lead in a different direction. But many of my friends indulged in the activity. We were part of the peace and love generation. Idealistic, non-threatening to anyone. Now, my friends were not criminals, but the current ganja laws and the laws as they were then are an example of where otherwise decent, law-abiding citizens are turned into criminals because the law is out of sync with our culture and history. Now, my teenage friends thought they could evade detection by applying patchouli oil as a perfume. Well, you know, everybody knows ganja is easily discernible, right? It has a distinctive smell. A blind person could smell them a mile away. The patchouli was a giveaway, as was their bloodshot eyes. The life of the criminal law begins at criminalization. To criminalize an act is to make it a crime. And we have, as Senator Young so vividly described, we have criminalized thousands of young men and women who are no threat to society and who ordinarily would have stayed on the right side of the law. And that's what this bill is about. It's about righting a historical and social wrong. Innocent law-abiding citizens caught up in investigation, being prosecuted, getting convicted and punished as criminals. To my mind, that was not just disproportionate, but wrong. And in my law practice, I have seen so many good young men, men within the 18 to 30 age bracket we spoke about, run afoul of the law for doing something that caused no harm, no threat to anybody, nothing to the society, only to themselves. And you know, more often than not, men who were shy or of an artistic disposition, whose lives and futures were blighted because of a personal recreational choice, which was frowned upon by the establishment. Laws which were foisted on us from outside interests. Senator Young's recount about Shaquille really grounds us in the reality. I have seen that. That is a common story. It resonated with me because real lives are affected. The establishment has failed Shaquille, as it has so many other vulnerable young men. So this law is long overdue, and it should never have been on the books to begin with. Consider, for example, the glaring disparity between alcohol, also a drug, but we glamorize it, we promote it, we sensationalize it. And as Senator Dayal Singh pointed out, and he is one of our most prominent psychologists, the marijuana is less of the two evils. Psychiatrist, sorry. Consider also the fact, as the Honorable Attorney General has pointed out, that the cultivation, sale, and marijuana was once legal in this country. I remember once driving around in Grand Couva and seeing a parlor where they had a sign for ganja for sale and the price for it. Absolutely. Marijuana was sold over the counter in Trinidad and Tobago, and it was often used for performing Har Puja, Shiva worship, right? I recall being amazed during a holiday in Nepal, where there is a week-long festival in that country, Maha Shivaratri, where sadhus and devotees smoke ganja, and it grows wild in the Himalayas, as a holy offering to Shiva. It turns out that Shiva is a god who likes marijuana. I understand that even his eyes are depicted as bloodshot. There is a verse from a 15th century Nepalese devotional song, "Your eyes, red and heavy from hemp's fumes, turned inwards, seeing all." I'm not going to get into whether marijuana smoking in hookahs is halal or haram. But my understanding is that it was commonly used by Sufis in particular during the Islamic Golden Age. And closer to home, we of course have the Rastafari movement, where the herb is used as a sacrament. Last but not least, let's not forget the many people who are ill and suffering. Chronic pain. Marijuana is often the one thing, the only thing that offers comfort and the alleviation of pain. So there's a very important aspect of the use of marijuana in palliative care. Criminalization of marijuana was misplaced. As I say, the guys who smoked tended to be of easygoing disposition. I don't know if that was because of their inherent nature, or if that was the effect of the herb, or a combination of both. But in any event, today we know better. Today we recognize that there are medicinal benefits, weight loss, asthma, glaucoma, pain relief, just to name a few. Senator Dayal Singh listed a number of the medical benefits. We recognize today the cultural and religious application of the plant. So it's not just decriminalization for recreational use. Weight loss, yes. The THC, you don't see fat rastas, you know. Now, for those who may be alarmed in our society about where this is going, let me hasten to assure them that we are not looking to open the floodgates. This is not a pathway to Sodom and Gomorrah, or as someone said, towards becoming a nation of drug users and potheads. I am satisfied that this legislation has been approached thoroughly, thoughtfully, and responsibly. I am not convinced that marijuana is a gateway drug. Senator Dayal Singh spoke about Ermintude's son, but it wasn't clear if the reason for his socially disruptive behavior was as a direct result and the sole result of the marijuana, or if it could have also been due to mental illness, such as schizophrenia, bipolar, what you call a pre-existing vulnerability. Yeah? I'm not a scientist. I can only speak from personal knowledge of persons who have been using it for years. Persons who don't drink alcohol, and they have shown little or no interest in hard drugs or designer drugs. And if you doubt my words, have a look at Willie Nelson. Willie Nelson, the country singer. He's in his 80s. It's well known that he smokes marijuana all the time. It has not impaired him. He's healthy. He's not into any kind of hard drugs. It could be. In any event, I accept what Senator Cummings has said about the research in support of marijuana. And it's also worth emphasizing that this legislation closes the door on some very dangerous designer drugs which are currently afflicting our youth. The legislation does not do away with the first schedule, which lists narcotic drugs under the Dangerous Drugs Act. The penalties for dangerous drugs have been raised in this legislation. So this is not a case of anyone going soft on crime. Right? The following are also worth flagging. Where a person operates any vehicle whilst under the influence, whether it's a car, a plane, a boat, machinery, that is now a crime. You cannot have or use cannabis on a school bus or around an educational establishment for children or where children are participating in any sporting or cultural event. Doing so will be a criminal offense. You can't indulge in public. Smoking or using cannabis in a public place remains a criminal offense. In fact, the penalties have been raised. And if you're a professional person, doing anything which constitutes negligence, professional malpractice, or professional misconduct, that is now a crime. Now, you always had recourse under the civil laws. You would have had recourse under the professions disciplinary body, but the law has been strengthened. Any of that dotishness and skylarking or irresponsible behavior is also now a criminal offense. This is not about getting soft on crime. So in general, I would say that the provisions in this bill have been thorough, right? And the drafters have shown particular care in getting the balance right. There are aspects of this legislation that I particularly like. The opportunity for persons who are currently charged with simple possession to apply to the court for a discharge. That is going to free our system. The opportunity for those who are convicted of simple possession to have their records cleared and their good names restored. That for those who may have slipped, you know, they went to the concert that Senator Dalsing spoke about and they had their spliff in a public place. Well, now you have the opportunity to pay a fixed penalty, just like a traffic offense. And the opportunity for a convicted person to apply for a community service order. Now, I am a great believer and supporter of community service orders. Years ago, I represented a very decent man. He was a sportsman, he was a handyman, but he was caught with marijuana. And we were able to get a community service order. He used his skills, he took advantage of the opportunity to paint and repair an orphanage. He did amazing work, and in the end, everybody benefited, and he was so grateful for the chance to be able to go on with his life. Because when you have a criminal conviction, that's it, you know. It's going to affect your employment, it's going to affect your opportunity to go to university, to travel, everything. And for what? A little spliff? A joint? So, all in all, I think this is a welcome gift for many. There is a place for drugs. It's the misuse of drugs that is the problem. This legislation recognizes that it was wrong to treat a matter of personal choice as a crime. It's about personal possession. If I were to summarize this legislation, it would be, here what? Being in possession of drugs is still a criminal offense in Trinidad and Tobago. But what we have done today is we have carved out a very carefully worded exception. This legislation allows persons to use marijuana as a comfort and for relief from pain. They can now get it openly and legitimately instead of having to send somebody to buy it from the underworld supplier and run the risk of facing criminal charges, conviction, and the serious consequences that will follow. This legislation allows persons and communities to engage in religious ritual without fear of the heavy hand of the law. So I heartily, I also want to say that this legislation is nuanced. It allows for flexibility. It enables law enforcement and the courts to distinguish between trafficking and the misuse of drugs on the one hand, and the use of marijuana for personal, religious, or medical use. So I heartily congratulate government for bringing this legislation. I am glad to be part of the dismantling of unnecessary, misplaced, and even oppressive provisions that we have on the law books. I think the bill is reasonable, balanced, and proportionate. It has a legitimate aim, and its measures are rational. Personally, I don't see any need to go to a joint select or any select committee. Well done, high time, pun intended. Thank you.
Mr. Vice President. Wow. I'm nearly tempted to utter those words that come at the very end of a contribution, almost immediately by saying that I concur with everything that Senator Vera and Senator Ramrat in particular put onto the record. But Mr. Vice President, permit me to make a few observations. First of all, Mr. Vice President, I'd like to thank all honorable senators for their contributions this afternoon, and I genuinely mean all. This is the kind of law that obviously will have polar positions. It's a sensitive issue. It's a heartfelt issue. I thought Senator Obika made significant sense in his contributions today. Some of it collided with Senator Mark's passion. I don't think that it was anything other than an intellectual difference between them and a matter of approach. I genuinely believe that we've managed to touch upon the large issues around this. So let's do it in quick fashion. I recognize that other jurisdictions have managed to treat with this issue in one shot. You'll often see cannabis control, economic exploitation, management of medicinal cannabis in one piece of law.
Acting Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Vice President, in accordance with Standing Order 14.5, I beg to move that the Senate continues to sit until the completion of the business at hand, inclusive of the matters on the adjournment. I thank you.
Honourable Senators, the question is that the Senate continue to sit until the completion of the business at hand, inclusive of the matters on the adjournment. All in favor say aye. Aye. All against say no. I think the ayes have it. The Senate will continue to sit until the completion of the business at hand, inclusive of the matters in the adjournment. Attorney General.
Thank you. Many jurisdictions have managed to do it in one shot. And by that, they take advantage of the fact that their constitution is very different from our own. Mr. Vice President, as the drafter of laws for the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, I admit to being strategic. I admit to wanting to achieve the objective in the least painful way. I admit to purposefully crafting two pieces of law to cleave the issues. They operate together, that bill which has gone to Joint Select Committee and that which is now before us. But respectfully, they had to be cleaved because the social justice correction is something that we ought to do with immediacy, provided that we have nuanced the approach carefully. The economic management, the medicinal prescription route, the single convention management, the sacramental purpose, those things take a little bit more time. Where is the license going to be done? Who's appointing the members? How do we structure those things? Treating with the social justice issue in the amendment to the Dangerous Drugs Act really is something which can be done today on the floor of this Parliament and at the committee stage. Why? We come to this issue after having had the benefit of a whole lot of global experience. We come to this issue after having had a whole lot of consultation. We come to this issue having had, as Senator Rambarat put very capably on the floor, the benefit of a CARICOM position. In case members don't remember, the Honorable Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Prime Minister of Barbados in particular, have re-energized under Prime Minister Rowley the concept of Caribbean unity. And it was not by mistake that we elected for the 60-gram limit, because Jamaica's at 56, Barbados is moving to 60, and we know what the CARICOM is doing as a whole. But in getting to this social justice issue, Senator Tripathi asked, what did the TTPS have to say? And I'll tell him now, through you, of course, the question being a good question from the Honorable Senator. But I want to start with what the prisons had to say. And this is pegged into the legitimate aim of social justice. Mr. Vice President, the submissions coming from the prisons administrative offices in a letter to me coming under the hand of the Commissioner of Prisons says this: The prison is satisfied that there should be significant changes to the law on marijuana prohibitions. Some of the benefits include legislation that would decriminalize marijuana and regulate its consumption. This would eliminate arrests for proposed small portions of personal, stroke, recreational, or medicinal. This aims at reducing both the cost to government and the cost to the individual arrestee, including not only the punishment itself, but also the stigma, disruption to life, and non-criminal sanctions. The legislation, decriminalization, can help to allow criminal justice resources to be redirected towards other pertinent criminogenic issues. This implied by this percentage has three components in principle: a reduction in police resources because of the reduced number of arrests, a reduction in prosecutorial and judicial resources because of the reduced number of criminal trials, and a reduction in correctional resources because the reduced number of prisoners. Therefore, reducing or eliminated penalties for marijuana use, particularly to the possession of small quantities of drugs, can reduce the severity of the criminal justice response to drug users. But I'd like to say something in particular, Mr. Vice President. And this is where they come to their key findings. They say this is the prison speaking for their perspective. Approximately 55% are convicted inmates. 65% of marijuana charges are simple possession of marijuana. And close to 35% were charged for trafficking. So the preponderance is on simple possession. Approximately 5% of female inmates are incarcerated as a result of marijuana-related offenses. 37% of this figure is remanded inmates. Hear this one. Hear this one. 70% of the young lads at the Youth Training Center are confined to the Center for Marijuana-related Offenses. I think you could stop right there. 70% of the young lads at YTC, now Child Rehabilitation Centers, are confined to the Center for Marijuana-related Offenses. Do we really need to hear Senator Mark say that we need to talk some more about that? Honorable Senators, do we need a joint select committee to talk while the paint dries on the walls of the prison cells for 70% of the youth in the Child Rehabilitation Center arena? Do we really need to do that? Can we take cognizance of the current law and current structures? Honorable Senators, I want to remind, we as a parliament, we in this Senate passed the Family and Children Division Bill. Remember that? I think the opposition probably doesn't remember it. In the Family and Children Division regime, Mr. Vice President, we created a drug treatment program in a drug treatment process for every child, someone under 18 years of age, coming into the system. Could we in this law have said, okay, everybody under 18 years, it's an offense of a high quality to have possession? Wouldn't we be entering into the madness of inequality of treatment? We know statistically 80,000 people in 10 years ended up before the courts. We know 70% of the lads at YTC are there for simple possession. If we criminalize children being in possession and we treat them differently from adults, what are we doing? How do we enforce that law? There's a solution. The solution is to be found in the Children's Act. The Children's Act makes it abundantly clear offenses relating to dangerous drugs, tobacco, and alcohol, Part 7 of the Children's Act, Section 35, A person who exposes a child or causes a child to be exposed to a dangerous drug or a substance having an effect similar to that of a dangerous drug commits an offense, is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $5,000, imprisonment to 9 months, or on conviction on indictment to imprisonment for 5 years. A person who gives or causes to be given to a child a dangerous drug or a substance, etc. Summary conviction, indictable conviction. A person who uses a child or causes a child to be used as a courier in order to sell, buy, deliver. Summary conviction, indictable conviction. Where a constable reasonably believes that a child or a person whom he reasonably believes to be a child is in possession of alcohol, tobacco, etc. And so we go. The Children's Act already treats with how we manage children. But we didn't stop there. This government birthed the Family and Children Division. This government opened the Children's Court. This government anonymized all of the data to treat with children. This government created the children's rules. This government created the drug rehabilitation rules. This government opened the drug treatment court. This government has that working right now. So when I hear Senator Mark recommend to us with a straight face, JSC, more time, talk, it's time to draw the line in the sand and say no. One more day for a young man at YTC, now Child Rehabilitation Center, is too much. One more day for a person on remand because they're just too poor to access bail is just too much. And I am genuinely, extremely passionate about this issue because contrary to the allegations that this is somehow an election ploy, I took the proverbial handcuff in the face, intellectually speaking, when I was busy trying to promote dangerous drugs, cannabis, marijuana reform in 2016. The Honorable Prime Minister corrected the position in the public domain because he reminded me later, listen, let's get the criminal justice system beginning to work. Because Senator Dayal Singh was talking a bit about why do we have to do this law? Perhaps if our criminal justice system was working, maybe we didn't need to treat with this. He talked about why don't we have night courts and etc. But I want to remind Senator Dayal Singh, this is a stain on your record that puts you out full stop. If we left this law as it stands, you have a conviction for one joint, because possession of any amount of cannabis is a crime. Then that is a full stop on your career. You will not pass go. That is a full stop on your employment. That is a full stop on your family life. That is a social stigma for something that is happening everywhere. Look, I'm the Member of Parliament for San Fernando West. In my own constituency, Mr. Vice President, in the very poor areas of the constituency, you walk along the streets and communities, you can smell weed everywhere. The police pass up and down, do nothing about it, but when it's time for them to put on a walk on the community, they'll go and arrest you for the thing they passed 100 times already. What's the point of that, Mr. Vice President? What's the point of that? Mr. Vice President, I can tell you in my first draft of the legislation, I drafted regulations to license one plant. Intellectually wrestled with the concept of, look, let's protect the child, let's manage the situation. If you want to have one plant in the area, let's let you get a license for it. But you know what came into the operation of that law? How are you going to police that? How are you going to police when you know the statistics tell you in 10 years you have 85,000 cases, 8,000 cases a year? That's who you're bothered to bring in, not those who you're left out. How are you going to police thousands of households in this country and not run amok? And that's why I actually have the regulation I drafted in my hands right now. I abandoned that. The cabinet abandoned that. I took that to the cabinet, and the Prime Minister raised the issue of practical reality in our country. We scrubbed it against the data. Are you actually being brought before the courts? What happens to you? Are you incarcerated for simple possession? 99% of the time, you're incarcerated only if you are too poor to afford bail. Pre-trial incarceration. As soon as you get to the court and you're dealing with under 100 grams, you effectively only get a $1 fine. That's what you get. Senator Dialsing raised the issue of night courts, etc. We don't need night courts in this country. We have the criminal division. What we needed was rules of court to cause you to go to court, be on time, have your matter prepared up front. But you know what, Senator, through you, Mr. Vice President? We birthed the criminal proceedings rules. We birthed the criminal courts. We computerized the magistracy. And what we are doing is we are rules-basing the criminal justice system. We're organizing the management of that system. But what we're also doing is freeing up the court system of thousands of matters, in fact, hundreds of thousands of matters. Why do you need 104,000 motor vehicle and road traffic cases? That's why we passed the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act amendments. And stick up in there, under Section 77, I believe it is, of the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act. It is in fact Section 70. Section 70 says, any person when driving or attempting to drive or when in charge of a motor vehicle on a road is under the influence of a drink or drug to such an extent as to be incapable of having proper control, etc. It then goes on to say, the minister may by order approve the device to be used for the detection of drugs pursuant to subsection 1. You want to know what? We've drafted the regulations for that already. The drug-analyzer kit exists already. I have announced that in the Parliament. The bill is ready to be laid now. So all of these pieces actually coordinate and interoperate. And what has taken us long to operationalize the motor vehicle and road traffic clear out? Electronic payments, done as of Monday this week in the Registrar General's office, to be applied in the Ministry of Works and Transport Licensing Division this month. As we take that online payment system, we had to digitize the data, licenses for driving, motor vehicle registration. We had to put in the camera systems. All of those things, the creation of the bodies to work it, they have been completed and will go live this year, 2020, in the first quarter. Take away the preliminary inquiries, 26,000. Take away the cannabis cases, 8,500 a year. You're left with 43 magistrates under criminal proceedings rules in an expanded judiciary where they can only have just a sensible amount of work as a workload. And that's how you get progress in your society, Mr. Vice President. So, yes, please.
Mr. Vice President, is there a plan for the cases where the children have to be released from the rehabilitation centers and the parents do not want them home, will not welcome them home? There are times when, for example, at Christmas, you try to get the parents to even take them home for Christmas, and the parents say, where are you going? Don't bring that child here. So I just want to know, you release them, where are we releasing them to in those cases?
Sure, we've created children's homes. We've created alternate systems. We've amended the Children's Act to allow for alternate remedies to prevail. So there is a plan for that. And yes, we have a brutally callous society. Old people are checked into the hospital as sick during carnival time and left there for 2 and 3 weeks at a time. Children are not taken home. We've dealt with children in need of care, CHIN's regime. We've dealt with the callous side of our society as best as we can. And the point is, creating the Family and Children Division, creating the Drug Treatment Court, creating the Child Probation Officers, creating the social services, doubling up the capacity of the Children's Authority. We have done all of that. Now, will there be religious leaders who will be upset with some of what we did? Senator Rambarat is right. Do you remember the hue and cry? 3 senators sitting on the opposition bench when we tried to abolish and in fact abolished child marriage. The UNC came to this parliament and said effectively no to child marriage, and then excoriated me as Attorney General for stripping out the 3/5 majority. Mr. Vice President, that was in the face of statistical information to demonstrate a 55-year-old man had married a 12-year-old girl. Pedophilia. And Senator Mark wants another joint select committee. Mr. Vice President, there is another regulation. Senator Tripathi correctly raised the issue of where's the supply coming from, the dilemma in the 4 plants, what happens if you're over the limit. Well, we had to treat with the source. But the data in Trinidad and Tobago demonstrates that we're not actually producing marijuana here, because the charges for cultivation and gathering are 0.2%, etc. That means we're importing it. The education program which goes along with this is critical. We're going to have to say, make sure you are not taking something that is contaminated. Understand there may be additives, as Senator Obika put forward. Yes, please.
Trip on that point, thank you. Through you, Mr. Vice President, because I was wondering about that very point. Does the government envision proclaiming this amendment to dangerous drugs at the same time that the GSC would end and the other bill, the control bill, will be debated? And I'm asking that because in this bill, there is the only reference I see to the supply side of it is the cultivation part of it. And if they're not done together, you have to ask yourself where people are going to get.
Sure, I'll answer that now. I was coming to that literally now. What time is full time, Mr. Vice President?
You finish at 8:23.
Sure. Section 57 of the Dangerous Drugs Act allows the Minister of Health to bring to life the regulations for importation of prescribable cannabis. Senator Ramrat said, this thing could have been done since 1991. Nobody did it. We were prepared to do it. Tough choice, hard call, not everybody going to be happy with you. I recognize Marcus Ramkisoon, a very hard-working expert in this particular field, who gave Trinidad and Tobago yeoman service. We had many a day fighting, he and I, as to the approach to this law, and I told him, I said, with the greatest of respect, listen, you don't understand our parliament, you know. You may have drafted the laws in Antigua and elsewhere where common sense prevails, but in our parliament, I'll have to face a few senators who will tell me, let's talk some more. Let's have a JSC. Let's talk till the kingdom ends. And so we split the laws. Big ring down fight, Mr. Ramkisoon and I couldn't understand why I was splitting it. I think he may understand today. But I'll tell you, Section 97 Section 57(1) of the Dangerous Drugs Act always allowed the Minister of Health to produce regulations. The supply is easy. I have the regs in my hand. The regulations, which I obviously couldn't put into the Parliament yet, are very simple. We propose to define what medical cannabis is, what THC means, how medicinal cannabis goods are to be dealt with, how they are to be labeled, packaged, and then managed through Food and Drugs and the Dangerous Drugs regime to be licensed to be brought in and dispensed by pharmacies. It means you are guaranteed to get a clean, non-addictive substance laced with LSD or cocaine or something that the man on the corner pretends to be good weed or that has pesticides or worse yet pathogens or bacteria in them. You can actually allow for the importation of this in world standard prescribable THC content under these regulations, which we intend to lay immediately.
Is that prescription? Or?
Yes, no, yes, this will be a prescription.
So if you could again,
yes, please.
So I'm asking about the ordinary man in the street, through you, Mr. Vice President, who doesn't go to a doctor, and from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the new regime will mean that the person in the street will think that I can have 30 grams or less for my personal use, not necessarily for medicinal use. How is that person going to get that in the absence of the passage of the control regulatory framework?
Sure. Because, number one, you see this concept of medicinal use? Let me call a spade, is a ratch. It is a ratch. All over the world, it is a ratch. Right? So the prescribable aspects are so wide that a doctor, a vet, can prescribe this position, and there are multiple uses. What are we talking about the use for? We're talking about the use for pain relief, for all of the good sides of it. We had to allow for the decriminalization and the supply side. All other jurisdictions started with the 4 plants. Where the control bill comes into effect is effectively to remove the personal supply via plants. That's where the industry will take over, as Canada did, to remove that growing in your home. But we can do the two things coming from different ends. The point is, do we wait and keep people in jail for another day? Do we manage this? Do we wait for the JSC, for Senator Mark to talk till the cows come home, intellectually speaking, in another joint select committee? We've been trying to pass the cybercrime law, the gaming law, the revenue authority, and there are certain senators that sit on some of those committees that just refuse to get on with the business, you know. 1 year becomes 7 years in a blink of an eye. And Mr. Vice President, what I'm saying is, we can allow for the prescribable quantities to come in. When the control bill is managed, the authority is birthed, because there's a whole amount of time taken for that to come into effect. When that comes in, we can manage the process. Now, let me speak to Senator Mark's point about the International Control Board supposedly going to condemn Trinidad and Tobago for what we did. Mr. Vice President, I'd like to tell you, as a matter of fact, right here in this Parliament building, not in March of this year, Senator Mark alleges, but in September of this year, Professor Francisco Toomey and Kibebush Welkima came in September 2019, and they definitely said to us, be mindful of the conventions, but that there is no retribution or consequence for treating with the personal use side of it. Senator Mark is correct. Many an industry player have come to the Office of the Attorney General to ask about the cannabis industry. In fact, one of the large Canadian companies came with a UNC representative. Let me repeat that. Past diplomatic representative, Mr. Neil Parson, who's a good friend of mine, brought in a Canadian company to talk about this issue. I listened to them as I listened to everybody else from the All Mansions team, everyone else, but they walked in the door with a UNC. So I don't know what Senator Mark is talking about. He'll talk about that in public and some proverbial mark the bus. Ask your own people about it. Because there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with the global discussion. That's why we treat with the two aspects in different forms. Now, Mr. Vice President, I'm proposing that we have some amendments to this legislation. The government proposes. I think there was a great meritorious point raised by Senator Richards. I wish to thank him profusely for the point that he raised, of something which other senators touched upon. How are we treating with the rehabilitation side of it? Permit me, Mr. Vice President, to point out that Section 6 of the Dangerous Drugs Act, the existing law, the existing Section 6 says, the court before which a person is convicted under Section 5 may, before imposing a sentence, order the psychiatric hospital director to admit the person convicted to the psychiatric hospital named in the order. But then it becomes very limited. Subject to subsection 4B, a person who has been admitted under subsection 1 shall not be kept in a hospital for more than 14 days. It just doesn't go far enough. Thanks to Senator Richards' point, we propose, Mr. Vice President, that we cause an amendment to the bill We're asking, Mr. Vice President, for that amendment. I wish I had mine. I'm asking for that amendment, as Senator West bails me out of my dilemma. I'm asking for that amendment to be that we allow for, at the point of conviction, notwithstanding any other written law, before discharging, because we're proposing to discharge in this law people who have been convicted already, or imposing a sentence on a person in relation to an offense under this part, and that therefore takes you prospectively and retroactively, the court may make an order for A, counseling, B, rehabilitative intervention or treatment, or C, psychological evaluation and resultant assistance. I thank Senator Richards for bringing that very material point. It was echoed by a number of senators across, on the opposition bench, on the independent bench. This has been a common theme. How do we take the next step forward in treating with it? But with this addition, honorable senators, I believe we've caught the last gap in this law. The government doesn't pretend that it can think of all angles, all options. This is obviously law being made in the dynamic context of what Trinidad and Tobago actually is. We don't make law for ourselves, we propose law for the country. Section 53 of the Constitution, for the peace, order, and good governance of our society. Mr. Vice President, we can make a difference in this country. I did give a very solemn word on a few issues when I was in opposition. You'll recall when we were debating the Children's Act, Senator Vera was there with me. In 2012, the independent bench did not vote for the bill. The opposition, PNM, and the UNC government passed that law that night. And the independent bench abstained because they said until we treated with the issue of child marriage, they would not support the law. Then in opposition, I said, opposite to then mover Werner St. Rose, I said to her, you have my full support. The PNM supports this measure. We'll get it done. That's why I came as Attorney General with the law to abolish child marriage. The second solemn promise given when I was in opposition, Mr. Vice President, was to my beloved senator, the late Corinne Baptiste McKnight, in saying to her, in a different setting, on her deathbed, not at the time, but as she lay there at Vita's house, that this is something that has to be treated with. We went to work. I want to remind you where we started in 2015. The first public consultation conducted by this government was on the prison system. We laid it bare. We then set about doing the reform aspects. What have we done? We have addressed plant and machinery, people, processes, and law. And all of the laws, the vast majority of them that we have passed as a country for years, have not been brought into operation because nobody bothered to operationalize whilst they were legislating. I'm very pleased to say that this government has a very different track record. Plea bargaining, up and running. Judge-only trials, even for murder, up and running. Criminal division, birthed, up and running. Family and children division, birthed, up and running. Explain your wealth legislation. First two preliminary unexplained wealth orders have been made in this country. That's no small feat. And yes, there will be some inconveniences as we operationalize law. For instance, in the demonetization of the $100 bill, it can't be an easy thing. But for heaven's sake, Mr. Vice President, when the fruit is brought into reality, and we start to take the profit out of crime, or better yet, let me put this on the record. Everybody who has a job pays taxes via PAYE, pay as you earn. Businessmen who are registered pay taxes. There may be a certain amount of avoidance, some evasion, but there is a vast majority in our country that don't pay their fair share or anything at all. It's not a laughing matter that a barber could do very well, or a hairdresser or a person involved in the beauty industry, or a lessons teacher, they do very well. They provide yeoman service. But do they pay their fair share? There's nothing wrong with causing the banking of money, in diverting our economy into a cashless system, in asking more people to pay less. There's nothing wrong with that. If Senator Mark's team won't allow the Revenue Authority to be birthed, well, you have to find a different way. You have to find a different way to get everybody to pay their fair share. And this law, this bill that we're treating with, Mr. Vice President, is about asking more citizens to buy onto the idea of social justice, management of societal issues, bringing the disparate pieces into order, and going with my favorite phrase, and you know what it is, just start. Too much of our time is spent looking for the perfect product. There's a great deal of merit in just starting. The Parliament is here to fix things. Mr. Vice President, without interrupting the rule of anticipation, I'm on my third amendment to the Administration of Justice Preliminary Inquiries Law. Why? You fix it as you go. You do your consultations, you scrub, you get the law right, you move the Parliament, and you get it done. And therefore, Mr. Vice President, I honestly recommend to all senators that there is merit in beginning this process with immediacy. I genuinely do not believe that this bill is so radically different in intent and purpose that it requires more consideration. The amendments to the Dangerous Drugs Act can stand alone. They can bring immediate relief. They can bring social justice. Obviously, we have to have an abhorrence to abuse. Obviously, we must protect our children. Obviously, we rely upon the Children's Act, the Family and Children Division, the drug treatment aspects that we have birthed and put into operation in law and in fact, Mr. Vice President. But Mr. Vice President, today is the day we really need to stop talking about continuing to talk. And more analysis paralysis. You know what the real political tragedy would be? To sit down and just not get it done. To take another 28 years to do something that should have been done already. Mr. Vice President, I recommend in all sincerity the legitimate aim of this law. I borrow Senator Vera's reflections that this law is nuanced, carefully constructed. I wish to thank all persons that participated, the thousands who came out to the public consultations, the CPC's team, the hard-working CPC's team that sat for umpteen hours with me and with Mr. Rambarat, Senator Rambarat, who is the chairman of the Law Revision Committee, my own Secretariat, Legislative Review Committee, the consultants in the persons of Mr. Ram Kisoon and others that worked with us, Dr. Pottinger. I wish to thank Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine for her work in leading the Caribbean charge on this as an advocate for social justice in her own right. Very commendable amount of work conducted by the University of the West Indies with the personal passion there. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I believe that this time has come for this law to be passed, and I beg to move.
Honourable Senators, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Dangerous Drugs Act, Chapter 1125, be now read a second time. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Dangerous Drugs Act, Chapter 1125.
Honourable Senators, before I call on the Attorney General to put the committal, we shall take a short break, and this House shall return at 8:30.